I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Hart, and I'm the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. Welcome to this virtual meeting of our board. Although this meeting is taking place virtually, we acknowledge that land we're on as we hold this meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The board also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. Members, are there any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing and hearing none, let us proceed. I'll now turn the meeting over to the board's executive director, Mr. Ryan Teschner, who will go over the meeting logistics. Mr. Teschner, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone, and thanks to everyone who's joined this virtual meeting of the board. Please note that, as always, this meeting is being live streamed on the Toronto Police Service YouTube account and will be available there at the conclusion of this meeting. On the line currently, we have Chair Jim Hart, Member Ainsworth Morgan, Member Lisa Kostakis, Member Ann Morgan, and just joining us now, Mayor John Tory. Councillor Francis Nunziata and Councillor Michael Ford will be joining shortly. On the line, we also have members of our board office staff, Chief Raymer, his command team, members of the service, and of course, members of the public. We have individuals who have registered to make deputations on agenda items. As per our regular meeting process, deputations will be heard prior to the item being discussed and voted on by board members. When it comes time to make a deputation, those who have registered will be brought into the call by our colleague, Doobie Cannon-Gisser. As always, deputants will speak, followed by an opportunity for board members to ask some questions. Mr. Chair, back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Teschner. Before we begin today's meeting, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Deputy Chief Peter Ewan, as this is his last day of work before his retirement. This is an excellent opportunity to recognize his impressive achievements in his 35-year career with the Toronto Police Service. As an accomplished, professional, committed, and focused member of the service's command team, Deputy Ewan has helped chart our way forward with his vast expertise in community policing, criminal investigations, community response, and strategic management. Deputy Ewan retires as a leader of the Community Safety Command, responsible for all frontline policing. I know he is proudest of the meaningful partnerships the service has developed and expanded that are most relevant to the heart of the community, including the Neighborhood Community Officer Program and the expansion of the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team Program, which helps ensure a more effective and compassionate police response to people in crisis. He's been recognized as an Asian organized crime expert by Ontario courts, and he has spoken both nationally and internationally on this topic. Deputy Ewan also oversaw a comprehensive internal review of the Toronto Police Service search of persons procedure, leading to a complete overhaul of the procedure, training and audit processes, and resulting in the Ontario Independent Police Review Director declaring the changes as the gold standard that all other police services in the province should follow. Deputy Ewan also served as an executive member of the service's race-based data collection strategy. I know that this important work will be pivotal as we move forward in partnership with all of our communities. Deputy Ewan has received numerous awards for his career contributions, including the prestigious Order of Merit of the Police Forces. Deputy Ewan, I want to thank you on behalf of the board for all that you have done to enrich our organization over your career with us, to move us forward in so many important areas: neighborhood policing, enhanced criminal investigations, and developing a better and more compassionate response to people in crisis, to name just a few. Deputy Ewan, thank you and good luck. Chief Raymer, I believe you want to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As a longtime colleague, I offer my best wishes to Deputy Chief Peter Ewan on his retirement, and as Chief, I extend congratulations to him on behalf of the Toronto Police Service. Peter has earned many commendations over his 35-year policing career. His extensive experience across all ranks and almost every pillar of the Toronto Police Service, and as a member of the command, His contributions extend beyond his direct areas of responsibility and have informed all areas of our business. In his most recent role, Deputy Ewan led the Community Safety Command. Most recently, he has been co-leading the service's work on race-based data, which is critical and groundbreaking work for our organization that will be so important to our relationships with communities. Peter is recognized for his leadership in improving trust and building relationships between the Toronto Police Service and the diverse communities we serve across the city. His commitment to the development of the Neighborhood Community Officer Program and the expansion of the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team programs are notable and have helped create a strong foundation upon which the service continues to build. I know I speak on behalf of his command colleagues when I say that he will be missed, both personally and professionally. Thank you.
Mayor Tory, would you like to say a few words?
Well, thank you, Chair, and just really echoing the words that the two of you, yourself and the Chief, have spoken, but as Mayor and a member of the board as well, you know, I had a chance to see on many occasions, one with, I'll say with a smile on my face, which was to go at Chinese New Year through Chinatown, downtown Chinatown, with Deputy Chief Ewan, and quite a rock star he was with people in that part of town. And you know, it shows you the regard in which he was held and the degree to which he was known as a deputy chief. But I also saw him, and this was a substantive assignment he had, but I had a chance to watch, which we had some of the community consultation meetings that led to the development and expansion of the neighborhood police officer program. This is back several years ago. And you know, it was impressive to watch him in a very relatable way listen to people about the program and help to shape the program in such a way that it could do you know, what it was meant to do, which was to provide a more effective way of having safe neighborhoods and effective policing, but at the same time to build up trust in the police. And I just watched him in action, listening to people and putting forward different propositions to people as to how we could make that program work. Similar, and I think, by the way, as has been mentioned by both of you that preceded me, that the development and expansion of that program was a singular accomplishment that was a hugely important part of us changing policing in Toronto, and he very much was involved in the development, as I said, but also in the implementation of that. Similarly with the MCIT expansion, I mean, this is a hugely important subject that's still before us, and he had a lot to do with that expansion, which was a way in which we could more effectively, and in a way that was just better and would engender more trust from people in distress, respond to those kinds of calls. So again, just I want to just thank him for his service, and I want to congratulate him on his service, and I want to wish him very well, and I'm sure he won't be a stranger to us as he goes about the next chapter of his own life, but he has the gratitude of all the people of the City of Toronto for a job well done and for service well rendered to the people over a very lengthy career. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Members, I'll now take us through the agenda. Item number 1 is the confirmation of the minutes from the virtual meeting held on January the 27th, 2022. That's being held down for deputation. Item number 2 is a presentation on Toronto Police Service digital transformation. That's held down for the presentation. We also have a deputation on item number 2. Item number 3 is senior officer uniform promotions. I'll be holding that item down. Item number 4, Medal of Merit Police Constables Scott Randall, Ryan Johnson, Jagmeet Dinza, and Aline Luna. Could I have a motion to approve? Item number 4, motion to approve. Ms. Kostakis, a seconder. Vice Chair Nunziata, all in favor. Any opposed? That carries, and we thank Nicole Corrado for her written submission on item number 4. Item number 5 is the ratification of board delegation of authority to Chair Jim Hart memorandum of understanding between the Toronto Police Service Board, the Toronto Police Service, the Ottawa Police Service Board, and the Ottawa Police Service. That item is held down for deputations. Item number 6 is artificial intelligence. We have 4 parts to that, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a presentation on item 6, and that's held for deputations as well. Item number 7 is a request for funds annual community events. Could I have a motion to approve item number 7? Mr. Morgan, could I have a seconder?
I'd like to.
Or do you have a question?
Sir, I'd just like to hold that, Chair Hart.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 8, nursing services contract extension and increase. A motion to approve item number 8. Ms. Morgan, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 8 carries. Item number 9 is special constable appointments and reappointments, February 2022. We have a deputation, so item number 9 is held down. Item number 10, auxiliary members, termination of appointments, January the 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. A motion to approve item number 10. The termination of appointments. Mayor Tory, could I have a seconder? Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? Item 10 carries. Item number 11 is the annual report 2021 Mental Health Excellence Awards granted by the Toronto Police Service Board. Nicole Corrado submitted a written submission. We thank her for that. Could I have a motion to receive item 11? Motion to receive. Ms. Morgan, could I have a seconder? Seconder, Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? Item 11 carries. Item number 12 is Annual Report 2021 Statistical Report Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. We have a deputant on 12, so that's held down. Item 13, Annual Report 2021 Summary of Grievances. Could I have a motion to receive item 13, the Summary of Grievances? Motion to receive. Ms. Kostakis, could I have a seconder? Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any opposed? Item 13 carries. Item 14 is the Annual Report 2021 Parking Enforcement Unit Parking Ticket Issuance. We have a deputant on 14, so that's held down. Item 15 is the Chief's Administrative Investigation Reports. We have a deputant on 15, so 15 is held down. So now we're back to the top of the agenda, members. So we're back to item number 1, which is the minutes. And Doobie, when you're ready, can you put on the deputant, please?
Mr. Chair, Derek should receive the prompt in the system now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
All right, I'm just going to start my clock here. I just want to say by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, in doing so as fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And whereas the Emergencies Act says the Governor and Council is subject to the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the Canadian Bill of Rights acknowledges the supremacy of God in a society of free men and affirming that men remain free. If I've ever led the communist that has infiltrated the public office of Prime Minister in this constitutional monarchy to believe in any way that I am anything other than a man as mentioned in Genesis 1:26, and that would be a mistake, and that I ask all of you to please forgive me. I want to point out this month's agenda mentions the words accountable, accountability 17 times, the words transparent, transparency 15 times, the words trust, public trust 6 times, and the term open data twice. So in these minutes, Diana included a speech you gave, Chair Hart, in which you said, "We continue our work in earnest on the 81 police reform recommendations, which put into place a roadmap for comprehensive policing reform and include building new community safety response models, initiatives to address systemic racism, and concrete steps to improve trust with our communities." Does anyone actually believe Chair Jim Hart when he speaks of concrete steps to improve trust with our communities? What would these concrete steps then even look like? Who gets to decide what these concrete steps would be? Since it's more reasonable to trust me at this point over the Toronto Police Services Board in coming up with concrete steps to improve trust with the community, I've gone ahead and made a list for you to carry out to achieve this claim of the board. 1, you can lead by example and start by resigning from this board, Chair Hart, as you chose to violate the residency requirement rule for members of boards at the City of Toronto when you chose of your own free will to move out of Toronto. The only reason you're still there is because Mayor Tory and Councillor Nunziata managed to convince the rest of City Council to vote not to follow their own rules. 2, during the appeal of Langenfeld versus the TPSB, Lerner's lawyer Cynthia Kuehl told Justice Brown that members of the public do not have the right to ask questions at these meetings. When I made a complaint about Cynthia Kuehl to the Law Society of Ontario that what she had said to Justice Brown was not true, The Law Society's response was basically that Cynthia Kuehl was just saying what the client had told her. So since this was before your time there, Chair Hart, to be fair, you can find out for us on just who exactly at the Toronto Police Services Board then lied to Cynthia Kuehl that members of the public don't have the right to ask questions at these meetings. 3, someone named Ian Altman at the Ontario Civilian Police Commission recently told Chris Langenfeld and I that Section 25 of the Police Services Act effectively says that the OCPC doesn't have to investigate police boards based on complaints from the public. So I'm sure one concrete step in the future the TPSB will take in the future to improve trust with the community is to tell the OCPC, we here at the TPSB expect from now on that the OCPC is to investigate with due diligence any complaint about us from a member of the public. 4, that the TPSB makes sure that interim Chief Raymer hires back the TPS members let go for not getting vaccinated, the Adrian Gilvaseys, Julie Evans, Greg Bolchansky, Matthew Blacklaws, etc. Now that Premier Ford has admitted that it doesn't matter if you take 1 shot or 10 and that you can still get COVID. 5, that the TPSB stop defrauding members of the public who wish to speak at these meetings with using a corporate bylaw that applies to a person and violating our freedom of expression unless you sign up by the arbitrary deadline of noon the day before the meeting, which in this case, this month, meant you had to sign up almost 3 days in advance or risk not getting a chance to speak at all. 6, that the TPSB hire Peter Slowly as the next chief of the Toronto Police, as there was obviously no violence in Ottawa until they managed to get Peter Slowly out of the way. 7, that the TPSB finally have an item at these meetings that addresses Joe Warmington's recent articles on the severity and number of TPS members who have suffered vaccine injuries as a result of having to get the experimental gene therapy product misrepresented as a vaccine in order to keep their job. And I have more, but that's my time.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Motion to approve. Ms. Kostakis, seconded by Vice Chair Nunziata. All in favor? Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Before we go to item number 2, we're going to hear from the Chief for his monthly update. Chief, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. The first item that I'll update the board and the public on is the truck convoy protests that have dominated the news cycle for the past month. The federal government's decision to mandate vaccinations for truck drivers entering Canada sparked rolling truck convoys that descended on the city of Ottawa on January 29th. Trucks continued to arrive in the ensuing days and weeks. The convoys succeeded in establishing a foothold around Parliament Hill. The organizers stated publicly that they would not leave until government lifted the mandates. At its peak, there were between 400 and 500 heavy trucks clogging Ottawa's downtown core. As we have all seen, the disruption that the protesters brought to government, businesses, and the residents of Ottawa was devastating. In observing what was happening in Ottawa, our Emergency Management and Public Order Unit, in collaboration with our Intelligence Unit, immediately got to work assessing what impact the events in Ottawa would pose for the City of Toronto, the GTA, and the rest of the province. With that came immediate multi-agency collaboration, including daily discussions with services across the province and the RCMP to determine what could be done to assist the Ottawa Police Service, and for us in Toronto, what needed to be done to ensure that a similar occupation did not occur here in our city. The symbolic significance of occupying the provincial seat of government at Queen's Park was not lost on us. The intelligence gleaned in the immediate aftermath of the Ottawa occupation indicated that the City of Toronto, along with border crossing cities like Windsor and Niagara Falls, were in fact being targeted by organizers. Calls went out on social media for convoys to meet up in various locations throughout the GTA on Saturday, February 5th, and to attempt an Ottawa-style occupation by converging at Queen's Park. In response to this threat, the service continued to plan, recognizing our obligation to facilitate peaceful and lawful protest, while at the same time deterring civil unrest and maintaining law and order for our downtown residents and businesses. We were also concerned that demonstrators could impede the flow of traffic for emergency vehicles on Hospital Row in and around University Avenue, and that City Hall, as our second seat of government, could also be a target. What was clear to our planners was that to prevent a repeat of Ottawa, we would require extensive resources. This meant, beyond our public order and mounted units, we required additional uniform support from every division and virtually every unit in the service, including returning plainclothes investigators to frontline uniform duties. We also reached out to our GTA policing partners who agreed to send uniform officers to further bolster our numbers. As we have throughout the pandemic, we continued our seamless collaboration with our City of Toronto partners on a number of fronts, the most visible of which was the use of heavy vehicles to assist with blocking off roadways. By the morning of February 5th, we had established vehicle no-go zones around Queen's Park, City Hall, and Hospital Row. By midday, what we estimated to be in the range of 2,000 vehicles traveled to the downtown core from the various GTA rallying points. Efforts to penetrate the police perimeters was most tested on the north side of Queen's Park on Avenue Road, just south of Bloor, where numerous heavy trucks forced their way past our roadblock only to be prevented from reaching Queen's Park by City of Toronto trucks positioned across all lanes of traffic. This resulted in the majority of protesters exiting their vehicles, walking to Queen's Park, and engaging in peaceful protest on the grounds of the provincial legislature. By late Saturday evening, the protesters, including every truck driver, left the area as heavy tow trucks were brought in as a visual warning that not a single vehicle would be permitted to remain. This was bolstered by firm public messaging that anyone contemplating an illegal vehicle occupation or the obstruction and interference with hospital operations staff and patients would face severe consequences. We continue to permit peaceful protests on the grounds of Queen's Park, including facilitating weekly marches by the anti-vaccination group known as the Line Canada. To date, we have had good success in preventing a vehicle occupation in our city. But I also want to be very clear that our plan benefited from the situation that Ottawa was confronted with and experienced. Over the course of the past number of weeks, we have maintained a visible police posture and will continue to do so until the threat of vehicle occupations is ended. We continue to believe that the Ottawa occupiers and their sympathizers, if given the opportunity, may yet attempt to relocate to Queen's Park. It is for this reason that you will continue to see a noticeable police presence throughout the downtown area. Our mission is also to ensure as little disruption to businesses and traffic flow as possible during this period, and we thank all residents and visitors for their patience. As was covered extensively in the media, the Toronto Police Service, along with other services across the country, contributed to clearing the Ottawa occupation. In addition to our planners who were already assisting in Ottawa, on February 17th, we deployed a full section of public order, 8 mounted unit assets, and additional frontline officers to Ottawa. In total, we had approximately 95 members deployed. And I'll just, for purposes of clarification, a POU section includes a senior officer, a staff sergeant, a number of sergeants and constables. It includes medics, special constables for arrest teams, and Toronto Fire Service personnel. On the morning of February 19th, our members participated in what is believed to be the largest deployment of public order officers since the G20. The Ottawa events were broadcast live and received international media coverage. In my view, the integrated command team conducted a textbook operation. The professionalism of all the members involved was an example for the world. The service was called upon to assist in dispersing the unlawful occupiers in our capital. Our POU is highly trained and uniquely equipped to deal with those bent on unlawful assembly. By that, I am also, of course, referring to our mounted unit. During the course of the coverage of the police action aimed at dispersing the occupiers, many commentators made reference to the effectiveness of that unit. Given the fact that the SIU are actively engaged in the investigation of an incident that involves that unit, I should not make further comments about that unit at this time. But once the SIU investigation is complete, I will have much more to say. I want to express my thanks to all our members, uniform and civilian, for their dedication and efforts to date. Our ability to contribute to the operations in Ottawa and to maintain such a heavy presence in our downtown core has been possible by canceling time off and requiring our members to work overtime. They have been resolute in their commitment to public safety. The second item that I want to discuss pertains to two disturbing trends that we are seeing with regard to gun violence in our city. The first is a recent increase in shootings committed by very young men, including young teenage boys. This fact became all too real 2 weeks ago with the tragic shooting death of an 18-year-old at the hands of a 14-year-old inside of David and Mary Thompson Collegiate Institute in Scarborough. The fact that a child brought a gun into one of our schools is disturbing enough. That it was used to commit murder inside the school is shocking and shatters the confidence of families. When children are able to possess guns, it speaks to just how accessible illegal firearms are on our streets and in our neighborhoods. The vast majority of illegal handguns continue to reach our city via the United States. Between 2015 and 2020, the average age of a person involved in a shooting incident, either as a suspect, witness, or victim, was 25 years. In 2021, the average was just 20 years. The second trend that I want to point out is the increase in shell casings that our investigators are seizing at shooting scenes. For those who aren't aware, every casing represents a bullet fired from a semi-automatic or automatic firearm. An increase in casings is gravely concerning because it's a reflection of more bullets being fired. Therefore, ammunition supplies are higher. Gunmen are more often involved in an exchange of gunfire on our streets, and most disturbing is the risk this poses for innocent people who may be in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 2021, we saw a 48% increase over the previous 5-year average in the number of shell casings seized at shooting scenes. This amounted to over 2,400 casings seized in 2021, almost 800 more casings again, meaning shots fired over the previous 5-year average. Given this increase, it is perhaps no surprise that we have also seen a dramatic increase in the number of overcapacity magazines seized. Magazines, or what some refer to as clips, contain the rounds inside of guns. Overcapacity magazines are illegal to possess, even for a licensed gun owner, because they are able to hold unreasonably large quantities of ammunition. In 2021, the Toronto Police Service seized over 300 such magazines. The previous 5-year average was 69. While the number of shootings in our city, fueled by the gang lifestyle, continues to be unacceptably high, I want to point out that in spite of these trends, our shooting numbers have not increased over the past few years, and in fact, we saw a slight decrease in 2021 from 2020. As Chief, I want to assure the community that the service is closely watching these trends and that there continues to be no higher priority than reversing them. We remain fully committed to putting every possible resource into both gun and gang enforcement and prevention. We are solving shootings at a higher rate than we ever have. We are making more referrals to gang prevention supports than ever, and we are fully engaged with our city partners through SafeTO to finding lasting, holistic solutions to steer our youth away from the scourge of gun and gang violence. That collaboration has never been better. We will continue to keep the public apprised on this important issue. That includes my update for this month.
Thank you, Chief. Board members, any questions of the Chief on his update? Seeing none, thank you very much for your update, Chief. Board members, before we go to item 2, the presentation, I was just advised by staff that one of the list of deputations was incorrect on items 8 and 9. So I need to reopen item number 8 because there is a deputation on item number 8. Could I have a motion to reopen? Ms. Kostakis, second by Mayor Tory. All in favor? That carries. So item number 8 is now open. Item number 9 does not have a deputation. There was one listed there. So can I have a motion to adopt item number 9, which is special constable appointments and reappointments? Motion to adopt item 9. Ms. Kostakis, second by Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any opposed? Item 9 carries. So that's off the agenda list. And we'll go back to item number 2. We have a deputant on that. We'll hear from the deputant after the presentation. Mr. Stairs, I believe you're giving us a presentation on item 2. which is the Toronto Police Service digital transformation. Not sure if you're speaking, Mr. Stairs, but we can't hear anything yet.
Oh, sorry. Let me start again. Apologies. Thank you, Chair Hart, Chief, Board. This is an opportunity for me to lay out what the Information and Technology Command has been up to since my my start with the service almost 2 years ago. I'm approaching my 2-year anniversary. We've brought forward contracts, hire processes, name changes, but that may come across as rather piecemeal. So I hope to be able to tie that together and present a more cohesive picture of the digital transformation at Toronto Police Service. First off, I want to be clear about our level of ambition. We are not running records or doing the IT department and trying to optimize that. We are trying to change the service for the better to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability of the service. That means that we are changing how policing is done through the deployment of technology. What that means is, it can be better thought of in these illustrations. Body-worn cameras have been active for a little over a year, and they are creating greater accountability in the service. Evidence.com, which is the cloud-based digital evidence management solution, is streamlining the process of gathering and packaging digital evidence into cases and providing those to the Crowns. And we've deployed technologies like WebEx to stay effective through the pandemic. These are essentially changing the capabilities of the organization, and in so doing, we have to think about how we change the way policing is done to maximize and to stay accountable as we are deploying those technologies. It's not enough to think about accountable, effective, and efficient, because these are too broad a category. We could almost take anything and say it has an accountability, an efficiency, or effectiveness impact. So the first job in the work was to define what I call a benefits framework, which is looking at what is it that we intend to do through the digital transformation. The benefits framework breaks down into these 5 themes, and we can describe some of the sub-elements. I won't bore you by going through all of them, but I'll just try and go broadly through the headlines. There is a heavy administrative burden. The cops will call it the job, not the paperwork. They want to get out there. They want to do the work of policing rather than be in the division writing up forms in their squad cars, on their mobile workstations, writing in reports and doing information, particularly duplicate entry information or entering information that they all know will never be seen or used. Once that documentation is done, we've got to streamline the information flow. There are too many flips between paper and electronic forms. Information that is getting lost in stagnant islands of information. And that means that we can't go digital. We can't have digital processes while our information flows are that fractured. And that means, in turn, we can't do the community engagement we want to do at a digital level and increase our capacity. We want to talk to our communities directly, face-to-face, as neighborhood and community officers, but we also need to be able to do it at scale with the digital technologies that we're bringing in. All of that creates an opportunity to rethink how we do policing, more along the lines of a product rather than an institution. We deliver policing products. And in so doing, we can start thinking about those products in a product management sense, in the sense of what the city is buying on behalf of the citizens and what the citizens expect in those products. To be able to advocate for and to iteratively move towards better and better products, we need to have greater agility. We need changes to happen on the order of weeks as opposed to on the order of years. So building the technology capability and base that will enable that level of agility is one of the key benefits that we're looking to drive. And finally, we need to support our people better. Policing is difficult. There are a lot of challenges, and those are both psychological, physical, and from an information perspective. And supporting our people is a key focus of our efforts. So that's where we want to go. How do we get there? We've devised 6 programs that together should be able to accomplish all of those benefits. Again, just reiterate, the level of ambition that we have here is high. We are trying to fix some very significant problems. So the first program is the digital officer. Those of you who are longtime observers of the TPS might think of the connected officer. We're trying to take that up a step. It's not enough just to give our officers phones. We have to give them the digital technology that sits on those phones. We have to give them the body-worn cameras, and we have to integrate those capabilities together to make the frontline officer's job easier. IT rationalization is about streamlining and simplifying all of our technologies and getting more out of each technology dollar that we spend. We also need to be able to shift our resources from supporting a lot of legacy tech into platforms and transformation. Platforms and transformation is the program that looks at bringing in digital technologies, cloud-based digital technologies that are going to help us innovate. We are, through the parking automation program, partnering with the TPA, Toronto Parking Authority, and the City Transportation to identify opportunities to make the experience of parking in the City of Toronto more streamlined and more effective. Our human capital management systems are aging, and in some cases we're lacking some key capabilities like staff scheduling. So the human capital stream is going to look at making investments in that area progressively. And finally, and probably the keystone of all of these projects, is looking at the records management solution. For those who aren't in policing, records management solution is the core investigative system. It's where all the information gets pulled together. So that technology is lagging, and we need to make an investment in it. All the other technologies will ultimately sit on top of the records management solution. Now, these programs are interrelated. We need to do the parking automation and IT rationalization in order to free up people and to a certain extent operating dollars to be able to invest into the platform and transformation work. Once we have those platforms up, they are going to support digital officer, further rationalization of our IT infrastructure, the records management solution, and the human capital systems. And all of those systems basically create the tools and apps that we're going to put on our officers' phones to help them do their job in the most streamlined and effective way possible. This obviously doesn't come without challenges. The challenges are many, legion, one might say, but probably first and foremost is innovation culture. This organization has a culture which is adapted to policing. More hierarchical, more command and control, and that is entirely appropriate for the mission of the organization. However, we also need to be able to innovate, and the innovation culture is often diametrically opposed to the policing culture. So in my role as the Chief Information Officer, I'm often having conversations about innovation and how to separate the innovation culture from the policing culture, how to maintain the policing culture as the dominant culture, but still have an innovation conversation without threatening the policing culture or trying to change it in its very necessary form. We are under-resourced, and to a certain degree, we are mis-resourced. I would say the mis-resourcing is the larger issue. I don't have people who understand the platforms and technologies, or I don't have enough people who understand the platforms and technologies that we need to move into. Cloud services, Azure, cloud hosting that we're going to need to move our platforms to. And those resources are very competitive to be able to source. So that's a real challenge for us. And of course, we have a lot of technology debt. There hasn't been, prior to my arrival, the focus on information and technology that would allow us to get to the point where the technology is updating itself through our vendors. So we've established a lot of technology debt, and we need to overcome that. If we're thinking about what do we do about these pieces, there's in the innovation culture, we're trying to have conversations about what innovation culture is. One of my great joys is going down to the missing persons team, the missing and missed team on a bi-weekly basis, and having chats about how to innovate around missing persons in this culture. We're training the team on product management and trying to bring a product management lens and that whole discipline to the service. We're in my team and the IT team, we're looking at customer experience and agile technologies. And we're also living the values of an innovation culture, which means challenging authority, usually my authority, having a good laugh about it, and thinking about the problem first and the people second. We are fighting hard to get the resources that we need. We're thinking about new roles in the organization, digital roles, the digital team, and also rethinking how we come at information management, less as a records team of clerks and more as information management specialists. We recognize that it's a difficult environment from a funding perspective, but we will need more funding in order to make the investments to be able to free up the operating dollars and reinvest them. But we think over the long term, the operating investment doesn't need to increase. We need to be able to get through the investments that we need to make over the next few years. Ultimately, that's going to resolve the technology debt. And I would say as well, the level of partnership that we need to have with the service, with the sworn officers in the service, is starting to get to where it needs to be. And it needs to be maintained at a high level where information and technology are considered as part of operational decisions and as part of the broader organization. So it's been 2 years, but we've had very significant impacts. We've put body-worn cameras on most of the service, most of the frontline service. We are still challenged in getting mobile phones deployed, and that's mostly a budget issue. We've rationalized out more than $500,000 of IT infrastructure last year, and we've decommissioned 3 major systems. In the platforms, we've stood up half of our platforms, and we are now operating in a more digital form with agile development. I just saw the wireframe of our call diversion work, and that's a great milestone. Parking automation, we've had great conversations with the city and with EPA. There'll be more on that to follow. The human capital system, major upgrade of the time and attendance system, getting us ready to look at staff scheduling capabilities. And in records management, we've run an RFPQ and inventoried our processes that need to be augmented. So we're going to continue with this work. In the digital officer, I really want to get to full deployment of the body-worn cameras and full deployment of the phones such that we have a platform on which to build for the IT rationalization and for the platform and transformation. IT rationalization, we're trying to shift 3 people out of legacy support and into project work. Platform and transformation, standing up all of our platforms this year and getting our first use cases built. The parking automation, developing the roadmap and initiating the first few projects on that. And in the human capital management, assessing the quality and capability of our HRIS system and whether we can move forward with it. Records management will be a major focus over the next year, where as we conclude procurement, make the business case for the change to RMS, and then begin the remediation or implementation of the RMS system. With that, I'll leave it, Chair Hart, to you, and I'll be open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stairs. Before we move to questions of you, we'll hear from the deputant, and then we'll come back to the board for any questions they may have. Zuby, when you're ready.
Yes, sir. Samia, you should receive a prompt for the system now to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Samia Ahmed, and I'm an economist in Toronto. I'm here to speak to you about the platform that this board uses for the monthly police board meetings. Before I jump into that, I wanted to speak on the misinformation that Chief Information Officer Colin Stairs is spreading. He mentioned that body-worn cameras promote efficiency and accountability. This is wrong. Research has proved that these do not stop police brutality, and data from these cams can be easily manipulated by police. Now to Zoom. Other major cities like Ottawa, Vancouver, and Edmonton, for example, all use Zoom to host these meetings. But Toronto is using WebEx, which has so few capabilities compared to Zoom or other meeting platforms. We are 2 years into this pandemic, and I think the board can do much better. I've been listening into these other cities' police board meetings, and Toronto is by far the least accessible. A platform like Zoom would make the experience more efficient for delegates, board members, and those administering the meeting. To start, on Zoom, delegates are able to join the meeting and listen in without the delay that the YouTube feed causes. On WebEx, delegates have to call in early and have to stay on an active call in order to not miss their spot. This means delegates will not be able to use their phones to receive or make other phone calls. Delegates may stay on the phone for up to 2 hours, and often it is difficult to predict when they will be delegating, so it is a risk to hang up and call back. This would not happen with Zoom. And if delegates do prefer to dial in, Zoom also has that feature, so it will not be lost by switching platforms. Secondly, WebEx does not allow delegates to join with video. Zoom does, and it is greatly beneficial for all parties since board members and sworn officers are able to see who is speaking to them. It allows for more transparency, better communication, and more accountability for the board members. If members are worried about quote-unquote Zoom bombing, Zoom has a host feature which allows control over who can turn on their mic and video and when, ensuring a safe space for all. Delegates are only given access to their own mic and video and are not able to change any settings of the meeting. The other cities that I mentioned have not had any instances of Zoom bombing due to using the platform. I would also like to speak about the police chief, his deputies, and the sworn officers. They are skirting accountability by sitting together in one boardroom. They do not face the camera and could be working on today's crossword, for all we as the public know. Other cities like Ottawa, Vancouver, and Edmonton have board members face the camera and sign in from individual accounts, like we see that the city councillors are doing. This promotes transparency, and with delegates being able to turn on their video, promotes meaningful dialogue. In Ottawa, for example, officers are much more responsive to delegates and engage with their questions more often than the officers do on this board. In terms of cost saving by using WebEx, since the organization has a long-standing partnership with them, I believe that the TPS budget is ripe with efficiencies, and it should not be a problem to make the essential switch to another meeting platform. The role of this board is to work with local communities to ensure that they receive adequate policing and that their voice is heard. If the meetings are not accessible, I struggle to see how this board is meeting its mandate. I believe making the change to Zoom or another similar platform will greatly increase accountability, efficiency, and transparency. I also believe that defunding the police is the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Board members, any questions? Seeing none. Now questions of staff. Any questions for Mr. Stairs, board members, on the presentation? Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Stairs, for your presentation. I just a couple quick questions, and I know it's this is a huge undertaking with a lot of challenges. So I'm just trying to get a sense of if you can help me understand what are some of the challenges, around connecting some of the demographic data. What are some of the system challenges around that, and what is it that you plan to do to address it?
Sir, was this in relation to race-based data or generally speaking about data quality in the service?
This is I think it's both. I think really it's obviously the demographic data that speaks to the ability to track the promotion process, those sort of things. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what are the challenges around that, and what if any solutions in terms of being able to rectify that.
Thank you for the question, sir. This gives me a great opportunity to speak to information management. You may not have noticed that we've changed the name of the command from Information Technology Command to Information and Technology Command, basically to give the same weight to information as to technology. And we haven't done so in the past. We haven't focused as much on the quality of information flowing through the service and its connectedness. And we have a significant number of issues all through the service in terms of how we measure, how effective that is at measurement, and how effective that information is at doing the job of policing. So we've basically created a directorship, which is now all information management, centralized the information management functions under that director, and given them the mandate to look at information quality and information flow at service-wide. That has culminated in an information management framework, which is the first of its kind in the service, and it may be more broadly. We're still unclear on that one. But that's looking at all of our information management quality issues. The types of issues that we're seeing, and I think you're alluding to a few of them, are can we link the information that we have from our different data sets together? And if we can, does the result make sense? Can we link our human resources data to our race-based data, to our occurrence data, and draw conclusions that are valid from the combination of those three? The answer right now is shaky. We can, but in many cases, we question the results or the validity of those results. And we're trying to get to a place where not only would you be able to combine those data sets, but we would be able to make them open data because of our level of trust in the quality of the information. And as you know, sir, we're having those conversations in the community advisory panel around race-based data.
So thank you for that. I think, sir, I think there might be just a clarification from my end, and I apologize. I'm looking more around sort of the HR side of it, like the recruitment, promotion, that side of it, and being able to address the data from that perspective. Sorry if I wasn't.
So I think that data set is a subset of the general problem that we have. And Savina Dhaliwal is maybe wanting to get in on this. Savina, do you want to answer that part of the question?
Sure, I can. So in terms of, good morning, everyone. In terms of the specific challenges around demographic data of our HR processes, at a 50,000 foot view, we're collecting it, and we're collecting it outside of our HRMS systems. The reason we're doing that is because it's just a matter of how we want to collect and link it to actual applications. So today we are challenged in terms of collecting it and linking it to an applicant, and then having that follow through kind of a member's journey, so that if you do ask up front, the ideal state would be you ask up front, and then you can see how, as a member goes through their career, promotions, where they apply, that type of thing, you get a sense for what you're working with. Today, what we do is completely outside of HRMS, so there's no linkage of the data, which is what Colin was referring to in terms of you have different sources where we're collecting it and they're not linked. We are actively looking at how to integrate the diversity data in with the HRMS. It's going through requirements and design right now and some configuration. It'll help us get partly there. The other piece that we're currently looking at is the different stages within a recruitment and a promotional process. We don't collect that today. We don't collect demographic data today. We collect just the numbers in terms of who's screened out. And that's a function of really designing what's the HR process and the data you want to collect at each stage. But that's work right now that's happening in the HR team with I think just with a bit of support out of ITS as well as talent acquisition. That's in design and development right now.
Thank you for that, Facility. Sorry, I was on mute.
There's further questions?
Sorry, I just wanted
to... sorry, go ahead, Mr. Morgan.
I was on mute there, sorry. And thank you for that, Savina. I know this is, conversations that we've had a number of times, and I'm just trying to, I recognize and I hear what the challenges are, what the problems are. I guess what I'm not necessarily hearing is what is the plan to address that. And so I'm hoping that, that could be shared in terms of the plan forward.
Okay, thank you. Board members, further questions? Mayor Tory.
Not surprisingly, maybe Colin, and thank you very much for the presentation. I think, if you look at the charts that have been put up there year by year, there's been some solid progress that we've been making, and that's, that's a tribute to your own leadership since you came in. I heard you talking about the investment, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I heard you saying that, and this is always the challenge that I think exists, which is to modernize in this way, digitize, but to do it in a way that at worst you come out even. And maybe even come out better financially, but at worst you come out even. My experience has been in corporate life, in the big law firm that I ran, even in government, especially in government maybe, that, you have the best of intentions to kind of take out some of the old human infrastructure when you make changes and you replace it with new digital and human infrastructure, but that the total cost of all that ends up to being no more than before or less. But you don't end up doing it. Don't end up doing it. I just wanted to get your comments on, your belief in whether we can come out in a way that, as you said, I think I heard you say, doesn't increase operating expenses overall, albeit that there may be some upfront investment that's required to sort of get you started down that road. Could you just comment on that for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor Tory. I'm looking into my crystal ball here. But we have laid out the rationalization program, and there's substantial savings and substantial rationalization that can be achieved through that rationalization program that should, in significant portion, offset the digital technologies. I think what we're going to see is as the digital technologies take hold, they're going to be so useful, we're going to demand more of them than what we currently serve. And so we're going to up the level of support that we give to the front line and to the organization, but that will be value added. So if we're looking at call diversion, we're doing a rather modest, we're building something very similar to what New York and London have. But if we go even further into what I'd call telepolicing, that may be an infrastructure lift that will be more expensive, but it will reduce the demand on frontline resources and offset. So we're embarking on the start of this journey, and we're building a capability. How that capability is going to be used, I'm not sure. But I do absolutely see savings in the millions of dollars within the IT area that can then be diverted. The size of the investment around some of the modernization is also business cases that we're going to bring to the board. But my confidence is relatively high. The other thing I'm looking at is IT spend as a percentage of global spend. And if we're looking at that as a ratio, that ratio is healthy. We're not underspending on operations. What we're doing is we're not spending those dollars effectively. And I see my role as fixing that.
Thank you.
Other questions, board members? Mr. Stairs, I just have one question. In your presentation, I note there was some words to the effect, improve the parking experience. Can you talk a little bit about that? And that's work that you're doing more broadly than just within the Toronto Police Service. Can you talk about that at a high level?
So thank you, Chair Hart, for the opportunity. I don't think we think about the parking experience in Toronto a great deal. But if you start to think about it from an experience design perspective, you quickly realize that parking doesn't make a lot of sense. There's these metal cards that are stuck to poles. We don't know ahead of time before we arrive whether we're going to have a parking spot or not. There's 3 or 4 different parking regimes under which there are multiple different subtypes of parking enforcement. We have 3 different organizations running 3 different sets of systems to manage parking as an experience in Toronto. So what we've been doing over the last year and a half is bringing those players together to have a conversation about what the parking experience ought to be and how we could go about improving the parking experience. This is taking more of a partnership perspective on the issue, and in many ways, Toronto Police Service is looking to be the first follower as opposed to the leader in this space. And as I say, there's more to follow.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. I think we all appreciated it.
Thank you, sir.
Board members, a motion to receive the presentation from Mr. Stairs. Motion received. Councillor Ford, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. Item number 3 is an item that I held down. It's senior officer uniform promotions. And I held it down to put a bit of a spotlight on it, quite frankly, because I think we should always have a spotlight on promotions in the organization. So I turn it over to the chief.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to acknowledge and congratulate our most recent complement of new inspectors who have been advanced to the board for promotion today. They are an excellent group, and we have a short video to introduce them more personally to the public. So we'll proceed with that now, please. Okay, that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Board members, any
There's
questions?
more, but they
on this
haven't been
item?
promoted yet, so we just went with the first group.
Any questions on this item, board members? Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something from the item 2. I'm not sure if the question was answered in terms of the plan. So, and I think within the context of this piece, I think they kind of work in conjunction and potentially can be part of the same conversation. So I found, like, I know that this is sort of the highlight of the promotion piece. So with that said, I'm assuming that there is a more thorough analysis with that. So I'm wondering if that would be available at some time. Comes to recruitment promotion piece, it was a little bit challenging just to have the highlights. So I'm just wondering if there's a more robust analysis of recruitment promotion piece available, and as we go through the first interview, second interview, and so forth.
Chief, if you want, I can maybe answer that. Yeah, so as part of the demographic data, there's a standard set of questions that we do collect. So gender orientation, sexual orientation, identification of First Nations, cultural origin, racial background, language, disabilities, religion, and education. And so we do collect that. The challenge with the senior officers in particular is that it's not, you're looking at 33 applicants. Last month when we brought in the staff supers, you're looking at 6. And so we're just trying to strike the balance between providing highlights and compromising any anonymity that we have sort of committed to with our members. But certainly we can look at a different way of reporting this so that you have a more fulsome view of the data at an aggregate level that we have collected. Does that help? And then in terms of the in-between stages, we know what kind of level 1 versus level 2 versus who was selected at. That is one of the challenges I alluded to around being able to follow a candidate through each step. And so we're not collecting the demographic data between the steps. By the 3rd quarter, we anticipate that functionality to actually be built into our HRMS system so we can effectively do that. That's the 3rd quarter of this year.
Okay, so just for clarification, so is that data being collected at the front end or the back end when it comes to?
It's being collected in 2 stages. So we send one survey to every applicant with the same, 8-10 questions, and then we send the same survey once they're selected. And that way we can compare. And we've been doing that for the promotional processes since just sort of mid last year. But for the cadets and some of the other ranks, we've been doing that for a full 2 years so that we do have some year-over-year trending on both of that, on both applicant and who was selected.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Sabina. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, board members? Seeing none, could I have a motion to receive item number 3, which is the senior officer uniform promotions? Ms. Morgan, seconder. Vice Chair Nunziata, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving forward to item number 5, which is the ratification of the board delegation of authority to myself, memorandum of understanding between the Toronto Police Service Board, the Toronto Police Service, the Ottawa Police Service Board, and the Ottawa Police Service. We have 2 deputants. Doobie, whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. We'll start with Derek Moran. Derek, you should receive a prompt from the system now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, I'm just going to start my clock here. So, as this item has to do with policing that went on in Ottawa last weekend, I just wanted to point out that at the very bottom of the Emergencies Act, there is an oath to be taken, and that oath, surprise, surprise, ends with the last sentence, "So help me God." As you may recall, when I pointed this out to you sitting in your office 2 years ago, that the oath you take, Chair Hart, also ends with "So help me God," you quickly replied to that, "Oh, I know. That's powerful stuff." Also, Scott Duncan has implied that the right to overthrow the government is only legal if you inform the provost marshal of your intent first. If not, you will only end up fighting the army. So this is from the application under section point 83.28 of the Criminal Code 2004, where the Supreme Court of Canada said, notably, the Canadian government opted to enact specific criminal law procedure legislation and did not make use of exceptional powers. For example, under the Emergencies Act. As we cautioned above, courts must not fall prey to the rhetorical urgency of a perceived emergency or an altered security paradigm. And this is from Beaudry versus R 2018, where the Court Martial Appeal Court of Canada said, I would add that no provision of the Charter limits the rights provided therein in times of war. In applying the measures set out in the Emergencies Act, the Governor and Council remain subject to the Charter and the Canadian Bill of Rights and must consider the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights entered into force March 23, 1976, accessioned by Canada May 19, 1976, namely, with regard to the fundamental rights that cannot be violated even in national crisis situations. So this is from Section 3 of the Emergencies Act itself. For the purposes of this act, a national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that A, seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or B, seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. This is Section 17 of the Emergencies Act. When the Governor and Council believes on reasonable grounds that a public order emergency exists and necessitates the taking of special temporary measures for dealing with the emergency, the Governor and Council, after such consultation as is required by Section 25, may by proclamation so declare. Section 17.2, a declaration of a public order emergency shall specify A, concisely the state of affairs constituting the emergency, B, the special temporary measures that the Governor and Council anticipates may be necessary for dealing with the emergency, and C, if the effects of the emergency do not extend to the whole of Canada, the area of Canada to which the effects of the emergency extend. This is Section 16. Public order or emergency means an emergency that arises from threats to the security of Canada and that is so serious as to be a national emergency. Threats to the security of Canada has the meaning assigned by Section 2 of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act. So this is from the Canadian Intelligence Service Act. Threats to the security of Canada means A, espionage or sabotage that is against Canada or is detrimental to the interests of Canada or activities directed toward or in support of such espionage or sabotage. B, foreign influence activities within or relating to Canada that are detrimental to the interests of Canada and are clandestine or deceptive or involve a threat to any person. C, activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada or a foreign state. And D, activities directed toward undermining by covert unlawful acts or directed toward or intended ultimately to lead to the destruction or overthrow by violence of the constitutionally established system of government in Canada, but does not include lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent unless carried on in conjunction with any of the activities referred to in paragraphs A to D. And that's my time.
Thank you. Any questions for the deputy? Seeing none, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Dubie, can you please put on the next deputy, please?
Yes, sir. Our next deputation is from Chris Langenfeld.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Dubie. Yes, in his presentation, Chief Raymer lied when he said that trucks broke through police lines and were stopped by trucks parked on the road.
Just want to hold you right there.
Mr. Yeah, Chair.
Time, please.
if I can have
It's totally inappropriate to say that the chief lied. He did not lie.
No,
Please.
it is not, sir. I have
Please
free
refrain from
speech, and
saying
if
that.
I want to call somebody a liar, I have that constitutional right. And the fact is, I was down there. There is all kinds of media and social media photographs that show that, in fact, police were the ones blocking the trucks in the middle of that intersection. There is no reality that the police broke through police lines. I was there, sir, and I know what happened. And the fact that you want to create a false story doesn't really matter. I will continue to speak for my time. You keep quiet, please.
No.
Now,
do not speak to us like that, Mr. Langenfeld.
I will speak how I want to, sir. You do not get to determine what the free speech constitutes.
Doobie, please end it. Doobie, I'm sorry. I've warned you twice, Mr. Langenfeld. Your time's taken away from you. I'm sorry. Doobie, end the deputation.
Thank you.
That was unfortunate. Okay, board members, any questions on this item? And I want to thank Nicole Corrado for her written submission. Thank you very much, Ms. Corrado. Any questions on item number 5, board members?
Chair.
Yep, Mr.
Just, I would just hope, you might, because I think what you did was appropriate, but make it clear so that all people who are watching this would know that people can come on and say whatever they like in terms of their opinions about things, but that, back in the day when I was here at City Hall, but also at Queen's Park, you would not use what they then called unparliamentary or inappropriate language. You're calling people names or insulting, addressing the chair, in which he did. And I just think it might be worthy of Mr. Teschner, for example, just making clear that there's a certain standard of decorum that's expected, and we want people to come and express their opinions as they wish, but not in that kind of way. And that will be the consequence, because Mr. Langenfeld can leave the impression that we're interfering with free speech. Not at all, but there's just a certain level of civility we expect at these meetings, and I think that somebody might make that clear just in the advent of what happened this morning.
Yeah, just before I go to Mr. Teschner, Meritori, I agree 100%, and I think board members and the public who are watching will know that I give deputants plenty of latitude on what they want to speak to us, and plenty of latitude in terms of what they say. And there is a line that can't be crossed. Meritori, you recognize that, as do I, as do board members. And that was very unfortunate. And that's not what we're here to hear from the public and get their advice. We're not here to hear things like that. Mr. Teschner, did you want to add anything?
Just to say to the mayor's point, Mr. Chair, the board has a procedural bylaw that outlines both the process through which people sign up to make deputations, as well as the decorum that is expected of individuals when they address the board. They're clearly outlined in the bylaw, and the behavior that was displayed now in terms of making allegations against individual identified members of the service, and the general decorum with respect, Mr. Chair, to the way that you were addressed falls outside or violates those rules. And those are clearly laid out. They are on our website. They're made available to the public, and they're really in keeping with what is expected of any public body hearing and engaging with members of the public, including at City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Teschner. I hope everyone heard that. Board members, motion to approve item number 5. Councillor Ford, seconded by Ms. Kostakis. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We'll now move forward to item number 6, which is artificial intelligence. We have a presentation on item number 6. So we'll hear the presentation first, then we'll go to a series of deputations, which I believe there are 5 or 6 of those. Mr. Teschner, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. It's my pleasure today to address you and to put before you a new proposed policy for the board with respect to the use of artificial intelligence. And I'll be doing the first front end of the presentation, followed by Doobie Gisser, who will take you through some of the details. Now, obviously, this is all outlined in the material before you. You've got the actual proposed policy that we've brought forward in your package, as well as this presentation and a board report. Today, we are recommending that the board approve a new policy on the use of artificial intelligence technology used by the Toronto Police Service. And our research indicates that this proposed policy is a first of its kind in Canada. It responds to an existing gap in legislation which does not fully regulate the use of artificial intelligence technology generally, or in policing specifically. And as we've just heard, and as you've seen in the reports before you on Clearview, this lack of regulation often results in officers potentially using, in good faith, technology that could pose risks that they are not aware of. So in response to this identified gap, and having heard from members of the public, this proposed policy was developed through wide-ranging, broad consultation with both technical and legal experts, as well as community organizations and members of the public as a whole. And we in fact received dozens of submissions, almost 50 submissions that were received through the consultation that we put forward on this policy. The policy before you today represents a best effort to create a governance framework that will guide future discussions and decisions regarding the use of specific artificial intelligence technology. But best effort means that it will be evergreen. And so as such, we will continue to examine this evolving field, which is continuously evolving, and consider at the appropriate times improvements to the policy in the future, based both on our own experience, as well as the experiences of other police services in Ontario, Canada, and around the world. Now, it maybe should go without saying, but it won't go without saying, that this work doesn't come from nowhere. A lot of good work, research, consultation went into the development of this policy, and we were pleased to see the public engagement and the engagement of experts on this, as well as previous policy initiatives that we've brought forward, including body-worn cameras, race-based data, and others. But I want to pay special tribute to the members of our team here in the Office of the Police Services Board, Buchanan Gisser, who led this effort, supported by Sandy Murray and Danielle Dowdy, who provided support both with respect to the public engagement and the communications. And certainly I want to thank the service, in particular the CIO, Colin Stairs, and members of his team that were along with us for the journey in looking at how we could develop this governance framework in best interests. Next slide, please, Dewey. Now, the first challenge of any policy or regulation in the AI space is really defining the phenomenon that we're discussing and trying to govern. The other reality is that there is no clear, well-accepted, consistent definition of artificial intelligence, even among the experts. And this came through the public engagement. So the definition that we developed through our consultations and research speaks of, quote, software and electronic devices which collect information about members of the public or their actions, or use existing information about them, and which use automated, analytical problem-solving models to assist or replace service members in making decisions pertaining to the information or the members of the public. And what you'll see throughout this policy is that while artificial intelligence, if accepted and goes through the risk matrix and is used, never usurps the role of an individual member of the service analyzing the information about them and making a decision based on the entire landscape. Artificial intelligence technology includes, but is not limited to, machine learning technology, neural networks, natural language processing applications, predictive technologies, computer vision, and technologies which make predictions using algorithms trained on large data sets. So I'll note that this definition includes technologies intended to replace, if you will, service members, only for the purpose of prohibiting the use of such technologies, as I will discuss shortly. So I want to move now into the benefits and risks of AI technologies as a bit of a backdrop. Novel technologies that make use of AI applications certainly hold the promise of improving the effectiveness of policing services and potentially increasing public safety in Toronto, while reducing costs, going back to Colin's previous presentation, by, for example, reducing the time necessary to carry out certain administrative tasks. But at the same time, we recognize that technological advancements may pose new concerns for the privacy, the rights, dignity, and equality interests of the individuals who are affected by them. For example, there have been instances where novel technologies not just in the policing sector, but even more broadly, were shown to incorporate and perpetuate pre-existing and systemic biases, resulting in both individual and systemic discrimination in decision-making. That is one of the compasses, if you will, that guided us in the development of this policy, guarding against exactly that. In addition, the big data aspect of AI poses the risk of mass surveillance, which again can encroach on the right for privacy that individual Canadian citizens hold, including their reasonable expectation of privacy in public spaces. So now we go to what the purpose of this proposed policy is. It is to establish a detailed governance framework or infrastructure for the consideration and adoption of artificial intelligence technologies by the service in a manner that will protect the public interest while enabling, through AI, for the Toronto Police Service to improve its service delivery to the public. And so a little bit now about our proposed approach. To achieve the goals of this policy, we have proposed a framework that will employ deliberate and thoughtful engagement in the selection and adoption of each new AI technology. All service members will be trained to identify first AI technology that they may come into contact with and potentially have the ability to use. And they will be instructed, required, to request approval for its use in advance. All AI technology under consideration will be evaluated for the risks that they may pose to equity and to the rights and freedoms of members of the public. Where a certain AI technology poses some of those risks, it will be subject to thorough evaluation, and the public will also be meaningfully consulted on its use. If the service believes that it can effectively mitigate the identified risks, the board will be required to review the service's findings and its proposed mitigation plan and determine then whether or not it should be allowed to employ that technology, and if so, under what conditions. In that determination, the board as the governing body will be guided by a set of principles that are enumerated in the proposed policy. And so every AI technology that is ultimately adopted by the service or proposed for adoption by the service will have to adhere to the principles of legality, fairness, justifiability, personal and organizational accountability, transparency, privacy, and meaningful engagement. Notably, these principles determine that all service members, again, individually remain accountable for the decisions that they make with the assistance of AI, even when those decisions were assisted by the technology. And so, put very simply, this idea that the computer told me so is not, under this policy, a valid excuse for action or decision made by a service member. Now that's the framework of the policy and its overarching purpose. I want to now turn it over to Doobie to talk a little bit about some of the details in the proposed policy that flow from there. Doobie? Sorry, we're just not hearing your audio.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Ryan. The proposed policy makes use of a risk-based evaluation, which is outlined in the policy and will be fleshed out in more detail in the service's procedures, which will be made public. The risk assessment tool will determine the risk level of any given AI technology based on the potential impact it may have on members of the public and on service members. The reliability of the algorithm used by the quality of the training data used by the machine learning processes. The greater the risk, the higher the governance requirements the policy will impose to ensure that the service's mitigation plan is achieving its aims. Those technologies whose risks cannot be effectively mitigated or that result in indiscriminate surveillance will be prohibited for use. This includes, for example, any AI technology that makes decisions without requiring the review by a qualified human operator, and use of AI technologies within a life safety situation where a computer error may result in potential risk to life and any technology that attempts to predict or assign the likelihood of offense or reoffense to an individual or a group. All of these will be automatically prohibited for use. The proposed policy sets out a number of processes to continuously ensure that the use of AI does not result in negative impacts, or at least to reduce those chances. The service will be required to monitor and report to the board on a set of indicators, as well as conduct additional public consultations post-deployment, as well as conduct additional, posting to identify any unintended consequences. The service will continuously review the use of any AI technologies to ensure it is still justified and to ensure that the manner in which the technology is used hasn't shifted in a manner that would increase the risks from its use. The board itself will also periodically review this policy to ensure that the governance framework it establishes is still effective and to align it with best practices and legislation as they develop. All AI technologies that impact the public will be listed transparently on the service's website. Members of the public can voice concerns with regards to the risks posed by a specific technology through a specific specialized mechanism that will be available through the board's website. Now, as Mr. Teschner noted before, this policy was developed through extensive consultations with experts, community organizations, stakeholders, and the general public. Stakeholders engaged in this process include the Information Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, the Ontario Human Rights Commissioner, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Law Commission of Ontario, and several academic and technical experts. We are grateful for the very important contributions these organizations have made to improve this policy and make it what it is now. In addition, a draft of the policy was made public, and members of the public were invited to submit feedback. We were happy to see that media attention was garnered by this process and a lot of engagement on social media. As a result, we've seen upwards of 7,000 hits on the consultation's dedicated webpage, and we received a total of 45 written submissions from both individuals and groups. And once again, we're grateful to all those who participated in this process and contributed to the development of this policy. The feedback received through these consultations resulted in substantive changes to the draft policy, making it a better policy for the people of Toronto. Changes that can be seen in the proposed policy compared to the draft that was made public include the elucidation and development of the guiding principles, clearer guidance for meaningful consultation at all stages of the AI technology adoption process, several improvements to the risk category. So, for example, in recognition that any kind of information on arrests or prior offenses could include biases. Any technology that is trained based on existing police data will automatically be, at the very least, of moderate risk and possibly higher. We've also made better definitions for the terms used in the policy and enhancements to the post-deployment monitoring and reporting regime. All the submissions were also shared with the service, and some of the recommendations that did not result in changes to the policy because they were too detailed or too specific and more operational will nevertheless guide the development of the procedures and the risk assessment tool, which will be made public, so you will be able to see them come into fruition. There were, however, some recommendations that we received from the public that we considered, but ultimately did not implement for various reasons, including some recommendations that were conflicting or that we did not believe they align with the research on best practices, recommendations that did not align with the goals of the policy, and recommendations that were not practical to implement. Some of the main recommendations that were not implemented are discussed within the report, and I'll also speak to them now. First, many members of the public expressed a general concern about the use of any kind of AI technology and suggested that all such use should be banned. Now, we need to note that given the ubiquity of AI-based technologies in today's technological world, we believe these recommendations would pose an unreasonable limitation on the ability of the service to remain efficient and effective. In some cases, it appears that the individuals who made the recommendations we're thinking specifically on AI applications that would already fall under the higher risk categories or even the prohibited categories, where the proposed policy strives to cover all instances of AI as fully as possible. We can think even of older technologies, such as text identification algorithm, OCR. And these technologies, which have existed for decades, now regularly are enhanced using AI, and preventing the service from using these technologies would not be to anyone's benefit. Forbidding the service from using any AI application will result in substantial costs without any benefits to the public. The proposed policy was designed specifically for the purpose of distinguishing these mundane uses of AI from those that could potentially pose risks and effecting a deliberate evaluation and public discussion around the latter to determine whether or not they should be used. Several submissions highlighted the need for an independent panel of experts to review AI technologies and advise the board accordingly. We believe that such a panel is necessary. However, it would not be in the best interest of the public and the best use of public funds to form one solely for the purposes of the Toronto Police Services Board. Since these matters are likely to be relevant to police services across the province, we believe that to maintain consistency, an advisory panel that would be available to all police services with a provincial mandate would better serve the purpose that these recommendations were aimed at. We're therefore recommending that the board instruct the executive director to explore the formation of such a panel in collaboration with other partners so that it will be available to serve the needs of police services boards and indeed other boards and agencies across the province. Finally, some of the submissions suggested that the scope of the proposed policy as drafted and needs to be expanded, and that the expansion of the scope will be considered by the, it needs to be expanded and increased to cover all algorithmic software or other broad categories of technology. At the present time, we propose that we continue with a proposed policy as drafted, and that the expansion of the scope will be considered by the board a few years down the road when hopefully the legal landscape is cleared up and the board will have more experience to base its decisions on. Ryan?
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Doobie. Before we go to questions of board members of your presentation, we'll go through the deputants and then we'll come back to you for questions. So Doobie, after you take a breath, if you could start with the deputants, that'd be great.
Okay, our first deputation will be from Mr. John Sewell. John, I see you're already unmuted, so go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm speaking on behalf of the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. Almost everyone who responded to the consultation on the draft policy thought that the draft was a good first step, since an AI policy is clearly needed for police services. But the almost unanimous opinion of the 4 deputants was that the draft policy left much to be desired and had to be redrafted. Unfortunately, the new draft before the board is little change from the earlier draft. It seems the impact of the public feedback was negligible, and the opinions of those expressed by those responses were not treated with due seriousness. And we believe at least 3 serious changes need to be made to the draft, the current draft. A technology review committee, which Doobie just referred to, consisting of independent experts and community members, must be established to provide advice to the board and the service in the use of operation of any AI. This committee should undertake the impact assessment of all AI programs being considered or being used by the service. Its report should be public, and the board should be required to follow the advice unless it specifies the reasons why that not could be done. The committee should be adequately funded from within the police budget. I recognize the comment that says that somebody else should be responsible for this. I think the province should be. It's amazing the province doesn't seem to care about this issue, and I'm glad the police board does. But given that absence, the board should be establishing that technology review committee. The current policy states in paragraph 1 that procedures and policies for the review of AI technologies will be developed in consultation with various bodies and experts. But as been seen with the consultations on the draft AI policy, the feedback has generally been ignored. The public is not protected with such a weak process. That's why a technology review committee is needed. Secondly, the 5 risk categories in the draft are not appropriate, and this approach should be abandoned in favor of a system where all AI technologies are considered risky. Many of the submissions and the consultation made this point, noting that the characteristics proposed in the various categories either had a meaning that was unclear or were placed in the wrong category. Thirdly, paragraph 16 states that the chief has until December 2024, almost 3 years from now, before reporting on AI programs now in use. Given the concerns about AI, this is far, far too long. The need to report on AI programs in use is immediate. The reporting date should be advanced to May the 1st, 2022. CPAC has told the board, whose job it is to represent the public in policing matters, that if public consultation is to have any meaning, the draft should be referred back to staff for further consideration in conjunction with the many individuals who have shown an interest in the matter. So we recommend the matter be referred back to staff, further consultation take place directly with those who've already made submissions and to the expert committees that have been consulted, so that together they can make a recommendation for a better draft AI policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, Mr. Sewell, I'll have a couple of questions for staff when the deputations finish out of your comments. Thank you very much.
Our next deputation is from Jack Gemmell from the Law Union of Ontario. Mr. Gemmell, you should receive a prompt from the system now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, it's Jack Gemmell. I'm here for the Policing Committee of the Law Union of Ontario. We submitted a written submission for your consideration, which I hope is before the board, and I'll largely be dealing with that. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. This is a very important issue, as I'm sure you're well aware. We appreciate the efforts that of the staff, and in particular, the director and his staff have done in trying to develop this policy. However, we still rely on the submissions we made earlier, and we would like to emphasize a number 4 particular points. One is, like TPAC, we strongly support the creation of a technology review committee. We think this is an area that the Toronto Police Services and the Toronto Police Services Board can take a leadership role. The proposal to, in effect, punt it to the province in our submission is simply a recipe for inaction. Province is not, as shown time and time again, it does not interested in these issues. A technology review committee is required in order to provide a case-by-case analysis of the proposed AI technologies. The policy is currently drafted envisions the creation essentially of procurement procedures and policies for new AI. And this uses a consultation process. We have some concerns like TPAC about how transparent and comprehensive it would be. But the bottom result will be a essentially one-size-fits-all procedure and procurement policies, and that's inadequate to deal with the challenges presented by AI technologies. Different technologies pose different risks, they have different performance characteristics, and they will create different deployment and training issues. And to imagine that you can create one policy or one set of policies that will cover all situations is just not going to work. You need a technology review committee to provide expert analysis on a case-by-case basis. Secondly, we joined TPAC. We don't like in section 16 that the chief has until December 2024 to review existing AI technologies, and that obviously should be made, whether it be December 22nd as we propose or May 22nd to 2022 as TPAC proposes up to the board. We note that the policy as presently drafted creates two categories of AI technologies, new AI technologies, which are subject to the review and assessment process in the policy, and current AI technologies, which do not appear to be directly subject to those policies. We think that distinction should be eliminated so we don't have two categories of technologies being deployed by the Toronto Police Services, one a grandfathered one and one the new technologies. We think the lesson from the Clearview use by Toronto police officers points to the need for this board to promulgate clear rules governing the misuse of AI technology. The risks of misuse are one is obviously to the privacy of the public, but secondly, it also poses risks to prosecutions when it turns out that the basis of the prosecution has been the misuse of AI technologies to gain an investigative lead. Finally, we'd just like to note that there's a human cost factor in all these technologies which has to be addressed. There's a shiny toy effect of these kind of technologies. You think they'll solve things, but in fact, they may actually simply generate more costs and create more problems. Most policing is a face-to-face matter where you have police officers providing their expertise and smarts to sometimes challenging human situations. We'd rather see police officers get out of the scout car and talk to people rather than stay staring at a laptop or at a cell phone looking for the answers there. So those are our submissions. Thank you very much for considering it.
Thank you, Mr. Gemmell. Any questions for Mr. Gemmell? Seeing none, Doobie, can you put on the next deputant, please?
Yes, sir. Our next deputation is from James Mackey. James? Should receive a prompt from the system.
Hello.
Hi, James.
Good
Go
morning.
ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before the board. My name is James Mackey. I'm a resident of the University Rosedale Ward, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information, where I specialize in critical information policy studies. I have come today to implore the members of the board to send back the policy for further review. The existence of a policy to govern the use of AI technologies is needed and welcome, but the policy as it has been presented to the board today is flawed and unacceptable. It lacks independent administration, is too relaxed on key timelines, and its risk assessment process is too loose. Members of the board, the policy is not ready and more work is needed. I was excited when this policy was first introduced. I, like many others, was appalled to learn of the service's use of Clearview AI. I felt and still feel that the introduction of governance into this space would ensure such a mistake would never happen again. However, I approached this process with some reservations. The service has demonstrated a willingness to violate the privacy of its own citizens, and officers showed poor judgment in embracing the tool so quickly. This has been compounded by the report delivered earlier in the agenda by Chief Raymer, in which he failed to mention that Clearview no longer operates in Canada because it was banned by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada for, quote, providing a service to law enforcement personnel and used by others via trial accounts representing the mass identification and surveillance of individuals. I respect the police in their capacity to investigate crime and protect our community, but they should not be trusted with AI any more than I would be trusted to solve a murder. Through no fault of their own, the police are not equipped to pass judgment on such tools. To that end, I wish to see some changes made to this policy before it is adopted. I will provide you with a summary of the issues here, but my complete submission contains a more detailed account. To start, there must be a stronger independent presence in the decision-making process. In the previous version, the presence of independent adjudication was more understated, and I appreciate seeing its expanded role in the updated document. However, almost all independent input comes in the form of consultation in designing processes to carry out this policy. The risk assessment is still performed by the police, and so are any reviews done after the fact. This is not acceptable. These assessments must be performed by an independent body of legal and technical experts with police input. As previously stated, the police as an institution are not equipped to understand the full consequences of the technologies they use without independent voices weighing in. Similar to oversight, the policy's proposed timelines are improved over the previous version, but are ultimately still too relaxed. In some cases, timelines are missing entirely, suggesting, for instance, that the board should be notified of newly procured AI technologies, quote, at the earliest possible opportunity, end quote, rather than on a specific deadline. All current technologies must be assessed by the far-off date of December 2024, years from the implementation of this policy. Furthermore, the continuous review process is a tangle of overlapping and differing deadlines, anywhere between 2 and 5 years. Consider that 2 years ago, February of 2020, COVID-19 was still weeks away from being declared an emergency in Ontario. 2 years before that, Clearview AI was still just receiving seed funding. The world of technology moves fast, and in light of that, deadlines must be frequent and well-defined. These guidelines must be reworked to meet the needs of a fast-paced technological environment. The most unsettling oversight in the proposed policy, however, is the risk assessment criteria. While the changes made to the policy are positive, they remain decidedly weak. One of, if not the worst, threats posed by AI comes as a result of poor or biased training data. If you put garbage into the system, then you get garbage out. And yet, under the current proposal, police would be allowed to use poor quality, biased training data. Data founded on discrimination only reproduces discrimination. The math is not infallible. Other criteria conflict with no clear preference, leading to ambiguities in the policy and the potential for exploitation. If all other factors of administration and enforcement met my highest expectations, I would still reject this policy based solely on the criteria used to assess AI technologies. This policy is not beyond saving. With the right care and attention, we can craft a set of guidelines worthy of emulation by other services. We do not act in a vacuum, and our actions here will be observed by the whole nation. We bear a responsibility to the people of our city and all those beyond it to get this policy right the first time. What this means is giving this policy the attention it needs, making its rules clearer and more binding. The oversight guidelines are not ready. The timelines are not ready. The risk assessment criteria are not ready. This policy is not ready. Members of the board, I urge you to send it back for further polishing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, Doobie, can you put on the next deputant, please? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Our next deputant is Madeline Daniello.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Madeline Bertanillo, and I live in Ward 15. I'm a first-year student at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information, concentrating on critical information policy studies. My classmates and I have been studying, among other topics, issues of AI accountability, racial profiling in AI systems, and surveillance infrastructures. You just heard from my classmate James Mackey, who is in the same program as me and shares similar concerns about the Toronto Police Service's use of AI. I'm happy to say ditto to everything James just said to improve the policy. Today, I'd like to speak about the values of humans and human errors. While the TPS's drafted AI policy gestures toward considerations of racial profiling and other forms of harm exacted on marginalized communities because of AI, I think that it is grossly inadequate to address the potential of encoding inequities into machine learning algorithms. My thinking on this topic reflects on Ruha Benjamin's work on race and AI, specifically her nonfiction book from the 2019 titled Race After Technology. Benjamin is a sociologist and a professor at Princeton University. She's brilliant and very much leading the discussion about technology and justice. I'm choosing to focus on Benjamin's contribution to the field because she really situates the current impacts of AI in a historical and social context. I would encourage anyone on this board to read her work or listen to one of her many interviews and lectures available online. If I can convey anything in this deputation, it is that AI is not neutral. It is not just a tool. As Benjamin writes, Technology is not just a bystander that happens to be at the scene of the crime. It actually aids and abets the process by which carcerality penetrates social life. I implore you all to consider how the worst decisions made by human actors, rooted in racism and other forms of hatred, could be baked into these technologies. Technology itself is a metaphorical blank canvas onto which human actors display their values, ignorances, and biases. This nuanced perspective is paramount when evaluating the TPS policy, which is rich with passive, neutral, and evasive language. To quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "We have guided missiles and misguided men." This quotation highlights the agency of humans to guide our technologies, firmly placing the onus and agency on humans to manage our own infrastructures. By contrast, the guiding principles of the TPS policy utilizes passive language, stating, "There have been instances in which novel technologies were shown to incorporate and perpetuate pre-existing systemic biases, resulting in both individually and systemically discriminating decisions." We heard this said earlier today. This passive construction decenters the role of humans in designing, encoding, and using these technologies. It presumes that they are insulated from human influence. They are not. Benjamin warns, "The outsourcing of human decisions is, at once, the insourcing of coded inequity." Thus, this sentence in the TPS policy projects the way that the service might practice digital denial if their systems do produce individual and systemic discrimination in the future. I urge the members of this board to consider that technology itself will not produce harms or save us from harms, knowing that what measures of accountability and justice will be applied to individual actors. As a final reflection, I will draw attention to my own positionality to this policy. As a white middle-class person with abolitionist values, it is important to me that I recognize my own stake in these policies. While it is true that I could suffer the unintentional consequences of algorithmic policing, it is much more likely that the material, social, and lived consequences will impact marginalized communities and deepen existing inequities. Plainly, I do not want to live in a community in which my safety comes at the expense of my neighbors. In all, I ask that the Toronto Police Services Board reconsider the use of AI technologies altogether, and at a minimum, put a stop to all procurement and deployment decisions until meaningful consultation with community members occurs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for coming today. Board members, any questions? Seeing none, again, thank you for taking the time. Duby, can you put on the next deputant, please?
Yes, sir. Next deputation is from Hamza Sayed. Hamza, you should receive a prompt from the system now.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. On the topic of the use of artificial intelligence, Torontonians, as well as this board, should be very skeptical of the TPS, given that it has itself admitted to the unapproved use of this technology in the past. Last year, Canadian Privacy commissioners found that Clearview AI, which is behind this technology, violated Canadian privacy law by conducting mass surveillance through the collection of Canadian photos without their consent. In 2019, TPS employees were found to be informally testing this dangerous technology without judicial approval and were forced to stop by former Chief Saunders. Perhaps many at TPS would benefit from a reminder that Toronto is not their own personal police state where they can simply do as they wish. A further demonstration of the blanket disregard that the TPS holds for public opinion is through the clearly prevalent perception of the service that public consultations are mere formalities which must be held before they can do what they wanted in the first place. While the presentation today claimed that changes to the risk categories were implemented, some of the most dangerous uses of this technology remain unchanged, namely the criteria, quote, where training or transactional data is known to be of poor quality, carry bias, or where the quality of such data is unknown, unquote, and the criteria, quote, where a system is not fully explainable in its behavior, unquote, should be moved to the extreme risk category instead of the high risk category in which they are placed now, as was recommended in the report submitted by the Public Interest Advocacy Center. The fact that the TPS leaves open the possibility for the use of such technologies is deeply disturbing. There seems to be almost no reflection in this policy of the deep unease that Torontonians clearly have in allowing the TPS access to such draconian powers. Moreover, it is unclear what the consequences will be for TPS employees who misuse this technology. On page 6 of item 6.1, recommendation 5 mentions that professional standards will be engaged if there is non-compliance with the cease and desist order to access and upload images into Clearview AI. And yet, there is no mention of what, if any, disciplinary action offending employees face upon investigation, or how such non-compliance would be dealt with in the future. None of the consequences for not adhering to even the very lax guidelines that the TPS has set for itself are clear. Finally, this policy ignores a crucially important potential use of AI within the TPS, which I hope will be addressed soon, which is to track the performance of its own employees. Far too many TPS employees clearly seem to think of their jobs as lifelong appointments, given that it is nearly impossible for them to be terminated. As an example, and I wish I was making this up, a current TPS employee has pleaded guilty in court to assault of a sexual nature and has been mandated by a judge to provide his DNA to the national database, and yet still is an active duty police officer. That is the exceedingly low standard to which TPS employees are unfortunately held. And we, as a city, continue to suffer as a result of the mediocrity, incompetence, and waste prevalent within the TPS. AI can be put to great use in tracking how much time TPS employees are spending working versus idling in city cars at their desks or wasting time on their personal or city-issued phones. Using easily and affordably available employee tracking software to a greater degree, the city can ensure that TPS employees are working efficiently and our incredibly highly paid detectives are in fact busy solving crimes. We can't begin to incentivize underperforming employees or understaffed divisions unless we first identify them. Given that the city has clearly decided that it is acceptable that homeless people continue to die on our streets due to our underfunded shelter system, as long as it means that there isn't any reduction in TPS employees, the very least we can do is ensure that these employees are performing effectively. Toronto spends on nothing more than it spends on the salaries of TPS employees. And yet, despite the immense financial burden they place on our budget, there is very little oversight on their effectiveness. The public remains in the dark on how effectively the hundreds of millions they spend annually are being spent. Any proclamations of the supposed great work that TPS employees are doing are unfortunately not worth much in the absence of data. And I'm sure that the police service, board, and union will welcome the greater use of artificial intelligence surveillance on Toronto Police Service employees to prove that they are in fact as essential to the operations of the city as they claim to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Doobie, can you put on the next deputant, please?
And that was our last deputant for this item. Sir, there are no more deputants online for this item.
Okay, thank you very much, Doobie. Back to board members. Board members, any questions of board staff or of the service on this item? Mayor Corey.
Yes, thank you. I had a question that specifically focused on the question of some kind of a body that could help us with this. When I looked at the policy and went through it, it ends up putting quite a huge weight on the board itself. And I'm not shirking the work as a board member, but I sort of wonder, depending upon how many of these different cases come forward, how much time will be taken up by people who I hope have the good sense as board members to, kind of, administer the smell test, as it were, but we're not by any means experts in this area. I mean, in the area of privacy rights and in the area of the usefulness of technology and that balance. The part we might be best at is looking at the balance, I guess, as between people's rights and the effectiveness of policing. And I took note on the way through the material of the number of investigations that had been advanced, I think was the word that was used by the use of this. But if I look at and what I'm coming to here is a question as to why we wouldn't take the success that I think we found in areas like racial, relations, also mental health, and have some kind of a body. And again, the question really becomes not whether it's desirable to have such a body, but rather what power is it given, as it were, to veto, for example, as opposed to making recommendations to the board. But if I look at Section 3 of the policy, requires a risk assessment to be conducted by the service, as it were. And then it goes on to say, though, in Section 10, that the board, on receipt of that, could commission its own independent review or conduct further analysis. So it automatically puts us in a position where if we're sort of thinking there's one that's particularly, risky on that scale, that we could have an independent review, and then the board is assigned with responsibilities later as we go forward to monitor the use of these over time, and then I think ultimately in Section 20 to review. And this is just with a view, and I know you carefully considered all this, and if you look at the narrative of the report, it says that and I don't want to try and mistake this, but it says the two main reasons for not having some kind of an independent body or an advisory body, as we've done in other areas, are number one, and I agree entirely with this one, which is the greater desirability of a provincial body that could look at this province-wide and establish consistent standards. And then secondly is the cost, which I don't, quite frankly, look at as being much of an issue any more so than these other committees we have represent a lot of cost to us. So my question is it worthy, just in light of what I've said, and I guess we've heard this from some of the deputants, although I'm not an opponent by any means of using these things in an appropriate way to advance effective, policing that also respects people's rights. But is it worthy of any kind of reconsideration of a body that could help us with this, both in terms of helping with expertise, helping with, I'll call it, quote unquote, more independent judgment or independent judgment. I believe the board members are independent, and taking some of the burden off the board. So that is my question about a body like that could help us with this.
Mr. Teschner, can you take that question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess a couple of things. Number one, as you pointed out, the report before you recommends that the board endorse my engagement with some other actors that operate in this space, including the Information and Privacy Commissioner and other partners, to explore precisely the type of expert panel that you indicated. But the reality is, in my view, if we go at it alone, if this board goes at it alone, what that sets us up for is potentially exploring these issues in a more siloed way from other police services and boards that will inevitably have to start exploring them themselves. And what that could potentially create is some contradiction in terms of where things end up tumbling down. So the idea here is to engage the expertise of the service, for the service to reach out, as they do all the time, to experts that they engage with in this particular area as they do their work in conducting the risk assessment. But then to really engage some of those larger actors so that we create an advisory group in this space that actually can create both some consistency in the area and not put us in a situation where we're potentially clashing with other individual groups who may go at it on their own as well. And so that's embedded directly within the report in terms of a recommendation to explore. In the meantime, though, we want to be sure that the service has a policy framework to engage in an assessment of AI technology that might currently be in use right now, and to be guided by the policy framework we've outlined, as well as the full freedom, as they always do, to engage the Information Privacy Commissioner and other experts that they're constantly in touch with on these issues.
Further questions by Tori?
Yeah, I wasn't clear at the end of that. I mean, I did see in there that if we were going to reach out and consult some people after, when I'd seen that in the recommendation, I was immediately concerned about the fact that you sort of approved the policy, but then on something that I think is a very crucial element of it, which is what advice are we going to get on an ongoing basis to help us to make these very difficult decisions, that we're doing that after. Like, in other words, as opposed to getting that advice and then approving the policy with some kind of fairly clear recommendation as to what. So I guess that's sort of a question, but it maybe it's Ryan has certainly told me what his intentions are. So maybe my advocacy on that is for the next section of the meeting. So I won't ask any more questions.
Sure, and if I can give you some added comfort there through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, we have had some engagements with some of these very actors, and looking at the draft policy before you now, we have those relationships, and they're in the tent, if you will, in terms of people who are prepared to roll up their sleeves. But the reality is we also have to be mindful of the many other police services and boards who I think we owe it to engage and say, this is obviously an issue facing police governance and policing writ large across the province. And let's try, if we can, to set something up that works for everybody and brings to this issue some consistency and approach that will actually be of benefit to all. And so that is the sort of green light that we're looking for in terms of having those conversations. But in the meantime, to put an infrastructure in place that we believe is sound, given our research and the public engagement that we've had.
Thank you.
Board members, further questions? I just have one, either to you, Ryan, or to Doobie. One of the deputants said that the feedback through the consultation process wasn't really taken seriously and wasn't listened to. I heard other deputants say, though, that changes were made to the documentations through the process, so kind of conflicting deputations. Can you just speak to that a little bit, either one of you?
Certainly. Maybe, Doobie, I'll take one shot and then I can turn it over to you. Respectfully, I disagree. There was a very thorough review done of each and every submission that was received in the context of the public consultation. And it was premised on a legal landscape that exists through the jurisprudence of the courts in this space as well. And so all of that was brought to bear in terms of framing out this policy. The reality is the draft policy that went out for public consultation was 10 pages long. The policy before you today has an additional 4 pages of content. There were a list of enumerated principles that were added based on the public consultation. There were changes made to the risk categories in the policy, including the creation of a 5th entirely new category as a result of that consultation, as well as strengthened timelines. But the other reality is there were contradictory recommendations from these submissions, and we had to do our work to reconcile them based on the principled and expert advice we received through this process, as well as our own research and the capacity of the service to actually breathe oxygen into or give life to the policy. And so I think that there has been quite a bit of work that was done to bring into the fold the submissions that were made in an appropriate way, recognizing the overall policy objectives that were identified. Doobie, is there anything further you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add just on the point of the guiding principles that were added. And that was in response to a few of the recommendations that we heard. And it also addresses something one of the deputants spoke to about this. It's not right to have a one-size-fits-all policy. And I agree. And this is not a one-size-fits-all. This policy puts in the infrastructure so that we can have the specific case-by-case discussions on each policy, on each technology that was brought forward. And those guiding principles enable even further that discussion and make it clear what it is that we want to achieve when we consider an AI technology. So I think that addition by itself, on its own, is incredibly significant, and that's beyond the many other additions that were made throughout this process.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Doobie, and thanks for all your work on this. Board members, we have 4 parts to this report. We have to take a vote on them independently because we have a couple to receive and a couple to approve. So I'll just walk us through item number 6. Item 6.1 is Clearview Artificial Intelligence, Toronto Police Service Use Review and Steps Forward. Can I have a motion to receive item 6.1? Motion to receive. Councillor Ford, seconder. Ms. Morgan, all in favor? Any opposed? 6.1's carried. Item 6.2 is use of artificial intelligence technology. The presentation that was given by staff, a motion to receive the presentation. Ms. Kostakis, a seconder. Vice Chair Nunziata, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Item part 3.6.3 is the new policy, use of artificial intelligence technology. A motion to approve the policy. Motion to approve.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out how to do this, and I was just going to write Diana an email because I want to move an amendment to paragraph 3 of the recommendations, if I'm looking at the right place here. The one that says new policy use of artificial intelligence technology.
Yes.
Yeah, and we had questions. We were not going to have speakers. Is that the idea? Because that's when I would have moved the motion, but I was also just going to send it. It's not long, but I was going to send it to Diana just to have her.
Absolutely. That's my fault, Meritori. Yes, absolutely. Do you want to hold that down for now? Part
Well,
3?
just for a minute, if we could, and I'll send this off to Diana if that's the right thing to do. Or I can
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my fault. Should have went to speakers.
No problem. Thank you.
Since the mayor mentioned that, did anyone wish to speak on any of these items? I can reopen if that's the case. No? Okay. Other than 6.3, other than 6.3, which you're going to speak to, Meritori.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. That's fine. Thanks. Thank you.
Right. Item 6.4 was the proposed board policy use of artificial intelligence technology. A motion to approve 6.4. Motion to approve 6.4. Ms. Morgan, seconded by Ms. Kostakis. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. 6.3 we can hold down for now and go back to it, Meritori, or are you almost ready?
I'm just if you give me 2 minutes to do something, I'm just typing this relatively short amendment to sending it to Ryan, and then I can speak to it. Okay.
Okay.
Coming along here. Just a second, Chair.
Okay.
Last word. Okay, so Mr. Chair, I in my asking my question, I kind of said why I was concerned about this, both from the standpoint of having somebody that helps us, that has the expertise necessary to give us some advice on this, and also from the standpoint of just the sort of burden this places on the board, both the burden in terms of, sort of, I'll call it administrative burden in terms of the number of these things that could end up coming forward, although I don't think it'll be a flood, but also the burden in terms of us kind of making decisions about these kinds of things when we get, say, a high risk report. When we are people that I think are good at achieving balance, but maybe not as good at being experts on the sort of the nature of this technology. So what I've done is I simply moved, I will simply move an amendment to recommendation 3 here, which talks about approaching the province, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and it says and other partners, about the formation of an independent expert panel. And simply because we're being asked to approve the policy today, adding to that these words that say, and in the absence of any positive response from provincial officials, and that's meaning reference to them setting up a board at the provincial level or a body, in the absence of any positive response from provincial officials, to report to the board on options for possible advisory, evaluation, and monitoring mechanisms which could be implemented by the board itself as part of this policy. So it simply creates a fallback that says, well, if Ryan goes off as we're asking him to do here under this recommendation and talks to the province and other people, and they all say, no, we're not interested or we're not there yet, because we are the first going forward with this. I'm concerned enough about us having this advice that if rather than holding us up from implementing this policy properly and with proper advice, that we should then have him report back concurrently on some options that we could have in front of us to implement, much as we have done in other areas of some sensitivity, like mental health, and have some kind of body that could help perform some of these functions and give us some expert advice. So that's my amendment that I've moved.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Mr. Teschner, I'll just ask you very quickly, do you see that as an impediment in any way? I do not.
No, Mr. Chair, I don't. I think having the alternative makes sense in light of the fact that we have to evaluate what response we receive from these partners for sure. I'll just ask from the perspective of Doobie and the service through the CIO if there's anything that I'm missing from a practical perspective.
I don't see any problem.
I don't see any problem, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Board members, can we approve item 6.3 as amended? A motion? I can't see anyone, unfortunately, because that motion is up there. So, Ryan, if you can see anyone?
Sure, I'll let you know. I see Vice Chair Nunziata and seconded by Ms. Kostakis.
Okay, terrific. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Board members, we now move on to item number 7, which is request for funds annual community events 2022. And Mr. Morgan held that item down. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Hart. So I just had two quick questions regarding the information shared. One is, if you can, is there an opportunity to sort of provide the breakdown of how the funds request, how that's being utilized? What was the, the breakdown of those funds? And the second part is how this information is communicated to community. Is there a how the awareness piece for community around these opportunities? So just those two questions I had on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Chief, did you want to speak to that?
Actually, I've got Randy Carter here and he'll answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Morgan, to your questions, so the community events that are led by our community partnerships and engagement unit through the liaison work that we do with those events that happen every year. To your question about how it is that the communities get to know that, there's advertising within the communities and there's advertising broader through all of the communities of Toronto that these events are taking place. And the budget comes from the special fund from the board, and it's a budget, so it's limited. And in 2020 and 2021, there was very little that was used of those for obvious reasons. A lot of these events couldn't be held like they had been traditionally held. And where they could still run virtually, we did our best to accommodate that for the communities. And I apologize, I missed your second part of your question, sir.
So that was basically the two pieces. I was just wondering if there was a breakdown of what those, I see the total what's requested, but actually what those funds went towards, if there's that more itemized breakdown of those funds. That was the second part of my question.
Yeah, what you see in the board report is the budget for those events. But in 2020, 82% of that was returned because the events couldn't happen, which is a pretty significant amount of money. And then in 2021, while there was, as you see in the board report, a moratorium on special funds, it was exempted for some of the community events. And it was considerably less that was budgeted. And even then, it was only a third of it that was used. And so I don't have an itemized list for the few that we did do exactly where that money went to. I could follow that up with if necessary, but only a small portion of what was budgeted was used, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. And the reason that we're asking for a bigger commitment this year is everybody wants to get out as soon as they can. And we're really looking forward to celebrating these communities.
Yes, and thank you for that. I know in the going forward, if there's an opportunity to be able to speak to that breakdown when it in terms of honorarium or guest speakers, transportation, I recognize there's some different areas. So just wanted to get a sense of in the going forward if there's an opportunity to be specific in terms of where those funds went.
Okay, I'll lead our team through the chief's office and we'll see if we can give you a little bit greater detail going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Nunziata.
Yeah, so just a question. I have the report in front of us. So page 4, where you have the that you have broken down the grants and individually. So that's where the money went. Am I not correct? That's on page 4.
That's what the money was budgeted for, Councillor, but that was not where the money was spent because it was just some of these events just couldn't materialize because of the pandemic.
Okay. Now, I know that this is probably off topic, but the funding for the CPLCs, they received their funding.
Yes, that's right. It's not reported on this particular board report,
Right.
but yes, Councillor, they did. And the CPLCs were able to help their communities, a lot of them with grocery gift cards by the end of the year.
Okay, all right. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board members, any other questions? Does anyone wish to speak to this item? A motion to approve item number 7. Motion approved. Ms. Morgan, seconder. Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? Item 7 carries. We now move forward to item number 8, which is nursing services contract extension and increases. I believe we have one deputant on this item. Is that correct, Doobie?
That's correct. It's Mr. Derek Moran. Derek, can you hear us?
Hi. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
I'm just going to start my timer here. I just wanted to point out that I'm pretty sure that in Brandon versus Fort Erie in 2017, the Court of Appeal cites a Supreme Court case that pretty much says that someone can call people such as yourself liars. So I was just going to say that if you guys feel so strongly that Chris Langenfeld can't come on here and call someone a liar, why don't you go with Chris to a court of equity for a declaration to settle this matter on whether hanging up on Chris because he called someone a liar violated his freedom of expression or not. And let Ryan make your argument on behalf of the board instead of him just sitting there behind a desk giving his opinion. So in this report it says, with the resurgence of COVID-19, the service is continually reassessing its response to ensure the health and well-being of its members. Just so these nurses are aware, thanks to a guy named Vadim on Twitter, he has provided a link to the Public Health Agency of Canada's site on the Government of Canada's webpage, where it says, and I have the screenshot in my written presentation, unlike some countries, immunization is not mandatory in Canada. It cannot be made mandatory because of the Canadian Constitution. I also provide the original link where this screenshot came from. If you click on it, what you will find is that it goes to a page where I also provide the screenshot that says, no information is available for this page. If you click on the next link that's provided, and I provide that screenshot too, you will find that it says, please note that the Government of Canada website archive is currently not available. We apologize for the inconvenience that this may cause. So just so we're all clear, Justin Trudeau's government has deleted, if not concealed, from their own website this material fact where they freely admit that, unlike some countries, immunization is not mandatory in Canada, as it cannot be made mandatory because of the Canadian Constitution. So in effect, all those truckers were trying to do there in Ottawa was get Justin Trudeau to follow his own rules. If anything, any of those truckers arrested should claim entrapment and or equitable estoppel as part of their defense. So I hope the nurses you're extending are also aware of what Premier Ford recently said, that we also know, I gotta go back to my screen where I have my timer here, just one sec. We also know that it doesn't matter if you have 1 shot or 10 shots, you can catch COVID. See the Prime Minister. He has triple shots. And I know hundreds of people with 3 shots that still caught COVID. We just have to be careful, and that's their choice. This is about, again, a democracy and freedoms and liberties. And Bill Gates at the Munich Security Conference 2022 recently said that, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines. And this is from the New York Times. We're back in 2018. Had a quote from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who said that natural infection is the mother of all vaccines. Dr. Kieran Moore recently said that I'm not going to tell a lie, given that we now know that it's 50% relative to Delta on the hospitalization risk. He was speaking of Omicron. I've presented at this board before where the UK's own data has said that the Delta variant had a survival rate of 99.9% based on a case fatality rate of 0.1%. So if Omicron is 50% to Delta, that means now Omicron has a survival rate of 99.95%. And in the pandemic plan that Canada had after SARS, it mentioned that individuals who recover from illness caused by the pandemic strain will be immune to further infection by that strain. Note that people who become infected but are asymptomatic would be expected to develop immunity to the virus. So these nurses don't have to administer vaccines to Toronto police officers anymore. That's my time.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much. Board members, any questions on item number 8, nursing services contract extension? Any questions? Anyone wish to speak to it? Can I have a motion? Motion to adopt item number 8. Ms. Kostakis, seconder. Ms. Morgan, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. We now move forward, board members, to item number 12, which is the annual report 2021 statistical report on Municipal Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. And we have one deputant on item 12. Doobie, when you're ready.
Derek, you ready to go?
Oh, me again. Okay, let me just start my timer here. Okay, so this is from the reference regarding Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act 2011, where the Ontario Superior Court said that the City of Toronto is a corporation. City Council can therefore seek access to a record as a person. What the city argues is the common law right of councillors to access the information in the IBMS. This is from the Offacanley Municipal Integrity Commissioners of Ontario, 2018, Corella. The commentary to this rule sets out that a member of council must balance the public's right to know how decisions are made at the city and upon what information council has relied in making its decisions, with the requirement to protect the legitimate interests of the city and the respect for approved policies of the city. By the way, Chair Hurd, you spent some time as a city councillor. Do you remember at any of those board committee meetings you were a member of, what would happen if a member of the public were to dare ask a question at one of those meetings? You know what happens. A city councillor sits there and lies to your face that, oh, you can't ask us questions. Did you ever wonder how that's possible? If the public already has the right to know, if we have the right to know, how can we not ask questions? But Premier Ford can't figure out why people are so hostile towards politicians these days. Really? So this is this is from the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Toronto Police Services Board. This was just this past November. The police submit that they exercise their discretion and that it should be upheld. They say that they acted properly and that they balanced the privacy protections in the Act with the public's right to know. So since the Toronto Police have acknowledged the public's right to know with this, I have a simple question for Interim Chief Raymer, which needs only a yes or no answer to it, which is, does Interim Chief Raymer expect Toronto police officers to uphold the letter of the law? This next one is from the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario regarding the City of Toronto. This is from 2009. The democratic legitimacy of municipal decisions does not spring solely from periodic elections, but also from a decision-making process that is transparent, accessible to the public, and mandated by law. When a municipal government improperly acts with secrecy, this undermines the democratic legitimacy of its decision, and such decisions, even when intra vires, are less worthy of deference. This open meeting requirement reflects a clear legislative choice for increased transparency and accountability in the decision-making process of local governments. About that open meeting requirement, Chair Hart, you know I made a complaint recently to Larissa Sciarra at the Ontario Civilian Police Commission about, and I won't read the whole thing. I said to her, I have very good reasons to believe that the Toronto Police Services Board has violated Section 35.3 of the Police Services Act. If the Toronto Police Services vaccination requirement aligns with the Toronto Police Services Board policy, then which month exactly at the Toronto Police Services Board at a meeting open to the public did the Toronto Police Services Board discuss, debate, vote on, and or approve of its mandatory vaccination requirement policy? As to date, Chair Hart has yet to respond to me. This is the Information and Privacy Commissioner, Ontario Civilian Police Commission, 2017. In its subsequent decision letter to the affected party, the OCPC refers to the records in some detail and then states, the OCPC is aware of its obligations to protect the privacy of individuals and their personal information under the Act. However, the OCPC also has an obligation to keep its actions accountable and transparent to members of the public. Informing the public of the outcome of an investigation sheds light on the activities of the OCPC and ensures that the public that the OCPC is fulfilling its statutory mandate. Which is ironic because recently both Chris Langenfeld and I basically got the same letter from some guy named Ian Altman at the OCPC, and I mentioned this before, that effectively the OCPC doesn't have to investigate complaints from members of the public because of something Section 25 of the Police Services Act says. So, and that's my time.
Thank you. Board members, any questions?
Oh, my question for Chief Raymer, though.
Seeing none, thank you for your deputation, Eric.
You're not going to answer my question?
No.
No? Going to conceal that information from?
Dewey, that deputation's over. Thank you. So board members, item number 12, the annual report 2021 on municipal freedom of information, protection, and privacy. Any questions, board members? Anyone wish to speak to that item? Do I have a motion to receive? Motion to receive. Ms. Kostakis, seconder. Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. The next item, board members, is item number 14, which is the annual report 2021 Parking Enforcement Unit, parking ticket issuance. And we have one deputy on that item. Doobie, when you're ready.
Sir, Brett Connors should receive a prompt in the system now.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Sure. Okay. And then again, I'm not sure if this issue really deals with parking, but I talked to the Police Service Board and they thought this was the appropriate agenda item. So I'll introduce who I am. My name's Brett Connors. I've been in education for 30 years, many of those in special education. And I quickly want to talk about the transformation that occurred in education those years. When I first started special education, we were in infancy, and knowledge about LD, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, MDD was limited. It was my job to do professional development in the school with teachers, as I have a specialist in special education, explain the science and academia of the variety of cognitive-based learning, try to help establish better practices. In the beginning of my career, there's a lot of blame on students for failure that exists in education. They don't try hard enough, don't pay attention, fools around, doesn't get it. Teaching practices change to understand how we convey information is vital to the success of students. The core focus of education is for every student to graduate and every student to be successful. For a student not to graduate, multiple interventions should have been in place and evaluated why they did not work. The system strives to be successful, and when a student does not graduate, the system evaluates the process. It does not blame the student, but strives to get better. In Toronto, we have an outdated model of ticket enforcement, where the data is available to make things better, but we continue to blame the driver. I've had 40 years of driving experience, and I've never got tickets until the last 5 years in terms of not following signs. The first one I got was 5 years ago. It happened in the Withrow Park area. I spoke to Alan Pickerton, who was in charge at that time. I'm not sure if he's retired, of the signs for Toronto and putting up the signs. He went to Google Earth, quickly established one sign was clearly totally out of place, that he assumed local residents had put up some sort of traffic barriers for safety concerns that weren't put up by the city. But certainly it was not an ideal spot to see the one sign that was through trees that indicated I can't make a left from 4 to 6. As much as that was troublesome, you're still better off instead of fighting at court without being able to pay for a high-priced lawyer and basically asking to have it marked down, to basically go to court and ask for a lower offense. Now, just recently, I was coming up Spadina as I'm taking my son to Toronto Western Hospital for an appointment, and there's a flashing green. So I know it's difficult to make a left in downtown Toronto, so I took the flashing green and made a left onto King Street. Now, this may come as a surprise, but for most of the city that doesn't work in the downtown core, doesn't live in the downtown core, and especially during a pandemic, is not aware of the King Street Transit Project. 680 News tends to lead with devastating issues. This is not a news item that generally makes the news. Local councillors tend to inform us of what's happening in their council area. Coming from Scarborough, that is what my councillor talks about. They don't talk about the downtown core. Having driven on King Street before, for me, it's a through street. As I come up to Portland Avenue, it's a green light. You're able to make a right coming south on Portland. So it's not a do not enter area as cars are, sorry, it's not a true one-way area as cars are already on the road in front of me. And again, I proceed through the light. Here I'm going to talk about neutral stimuluses.
Mr. Connors, just so you know, you have 20 seconds left.
I have 20 seconds left. Sorry. All right. I talked for 5 minutes there. My apologies. Anyway, I'm going to go really quickly to the paragraph. Sorry. As we follow science, we work to keep our roads safer and drivers out of the court system. The idea of 99% of visible and roundabouts used in advanced cities all around this area is that less lights and signs and reducing outside stimuli make for safer driving and safer experience for pedestrians. This has all been researched, based, and proven. We're going contrary to science happening around the world by adding more signs and more restrictions, making more of a distracted driver. The moratorium on enforcement will still allow police to give warning tickets or ticket repeat offenders, but will also allow for the collection of data. This can only be done in partnership with the institutions of higher learning. I believe we can and should be better for the next year.
You're at about 5:25. I have to wrap you up, but we have your written submission, which is very helpful. So we have your verbal, which we've just heard, and we have your written submission as well. We thank you for doing both.
Sure. Thanks for your time. That was really, because I don't have 5 here. That was 5 minutes, or?
Yes, it was, sir. Yeah.
Sure. Can I just have 10 seconds and I'll be done?
Unfortunately, I can't do that. I have to be fair to everybody. I'd love to give you 10 more seconds, but I have to be
fair enough. I appreciate your time meeting, and thanks. Sorry, I was, okay. I should have timed myself better. My apologies.
That's okay. And thank you for coming to speak with us. We appreciate hearing from someone new. That's terrific. Thank you. Board members, any questions on this report? Anyone wish to speak to it? Can I have a motion to receive item number 14? Motion received. Ms. Kostakis, second by Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Now we move forward to our last item on the public agenda.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but one of the recommendations on this is to forward this to government and licensing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, okay. Just wanted to confirm that. So we're receiving and then forwarding on. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Final item for today on the public agenda is Chief's Administrative Investigation Reports. We have one deputant and one written submission from Nicole Corrado, and we thank her for that. Can you put on the one deputant, please, Doobie?
Sir. Hamza Sayed should receive a prompt to the system now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. First, I would like to acknowledge that today is the final day of Black History Month and recognize the immense contributions that Black Canadians have made and continue to make in our society. Coming to the topic at hand, we see in this month's investigation reports more of the same, more broken bones and life-altering injuries, more complaints of sexual assault, more deaths in custody, and crucially, a continued refusal by the TPS to release race-based data on its SIU complainants. Of course, this long-standing resistance to divulge the frequency with which the TPS is using force on racialized Torontonians is not at all surprising, because the data would surely confirm what we all already know to be true, which is that the TPS is a systemically racist institution which inflicts violence disproportionately against Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people. This fact was brought into sharp focus this month as we learned that TPS employees were among those donating and participating in the white supremacist and racist occupation we witnessed in Ottawa and elsewhere in Canada. This news, of course, is also not at all surprising to the racialized Torontonians who have been subjected to and have suffered from the routine racist violence of the TPS for decades. After all, it makes perfect sense that an institution known for its racism and tyranny would disproportionately attract and recruit people who share those values. And yet, instead of attempting any meaningful reform or heeding the widespread calls for defunding, this board and the council has awarded TPS with an additional nearly $25 million this year. And the reason councillors and Mayor Tory continue to give for this decision is the deeply disingenuous refrain that this move has the support of the public. Well, as a longtime resident of Jane and Finch, one of the poorest, most underserved, and over-policed neighborhoods in the city, I can tell you that this move does not have my support or that of my neighbors. To be clear, the residents of Toronto, irrespective of where they live, do not support the fact that unhoused people continue to die on our streets in this cold winter due to lack of capacity in our shelters, because council and this board would rather spend that money on the salaries of TPS employees, including the three suspended for alleged gang sex assault, whose paid suspension, read paid vacation, we, the taxpayers, have been funding for 8 years now. Instead of addressing any of these myriad concerns, this board continues its sycophantic praise for and blind subservience to the acting chief whose work it is tasked to oversee. Our public policy suffers from a severe lack of empathy, and the composition of this board is emblematic of that lack of empathy. The members of this board, including the councillors and mayor, all have long and admirable careers as public servants. But while they have shown in the last month that they are great at trying to resolve issues with Toronto's snow removal, for example, something which they themselves are also affected by, they have unfortunately also demonstrated that they are less willing and able to respond to calls from poor, marginalized, and racialized groups about the harm that policing and the immense toll it takes on our budget is causing them. Finally, at the risk of stating the obvious, this board is not at all representative of the city in which we live. I can't think of another board or committee in the city in which inclusion of racialized people is more crucial. And yet, City Council has failed to appoint a single racialized person to this board. We continue to see, month after month, that TPS inflicts violence with functional impunity against the public, all while a white director of the SIU decides that it was lawful and a white police chief reports to an overwhelmingly white police board that the file has been closed. As the terms of several board members are set to expire in November this year, I hope that they will reflect deeply on whether their continued presence on this board is. I hope that next Black History Month, I am able to speak to a far more representative police board, one which goes beyond tokenistic lip service to meaningful action on reform. Thank you.
Board members, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you. Board members, any questions on any of the items under item 15? Any of the reports? Anyone wish to speak to any of those reports? Could I have a motion to receive? Ms. Morgan, could I have a seconder? Seconder. Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. That is the end of all of our items on the public agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Kostakis, seconded by Muratori, all in favor? Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, board members.